Thank you for returning for chapters 11 through 15 of E. Doc Smith's The Skylark of Space. Now for the continuation of the story. Chapter 11, Through Space into the Carboniferous. Seaton opened his eyes and gazed about him wonderingly. Only half-conscious, bruised and sore in every part of his body, he could not at first realize what had happened. Instinctively drawing a deep breath, he coughed and choked as the undiluted oxygen filled his lungs, bringing with it a complete understanding of the situation. Knowing from the lack of any apparent motion that the power had been sufficient to pull the car away from that fatal globe, his first thought was for Dorothy, and he tore off his helmet and turned toward her. The force of even that slight movement wafted him gently into the air, where he hung suspended several minutes before his struggles enabled him to clutch a post and draw himself down to the floor. A quick glance around informed him that Dorothy, as well as the others, was still unconscious. Making his way rapidly to her, he placed her face downward upon the floor and began artificial respiration. Very soon he was rewarded by the coughing he had longed to hear. He tore off her helmet and clasped her to his breast in an agony of relief, while she sobbed convulsively upon his shoulder. The first ecstasy of their greeting over, Dorothy started guiltily. "Oh, Dick!" she exclaimed. "How about Peggy? You must see how she is!" "Never mind," answered Crane's voice cheerily. "She is coming to nicely." Glancing around quickly, they saw that Crane had already revived the stranger, and that Duquesne was not in sight. Dorothy blushed, the vivid wave of color rising to her glorious hair, and hastily disengaged her arms from around her lover's neck, drawing away from him. Seaton, also blushing, dropped his arms, and Dorothy floated away from him, frantically clutching at a brace just beyond reach. "Pull me down!" "Dick!" she called, laughing gaily. Seaton, seizing her instinctively, neglected his own anchorage, and they hung in the air together, while Crane and Margaret, each holding a strap, laughed with unrestrained merriment. "Tweet, tweet! I'm a canary!" chuckled Seaton. "Throw us a rope!" "A dicky bird, you mean?" interposed Dorothy. "I knew that you were a sleight-of-hand expert, Dick, but I did not know that levitation was one of your specialties," remarked Crane with mock gravity. "That is a peculiar pose you are holding now. What are you doing? Sitting on an imaginary pedestal?" "I'll be sitting on your neck if you don't get a wiggle on with that rope," retorted Seaton. But before Crane had time to obey the command, the floating couple had approached close enough to the ceiling so that Seaton, with a slight pressure of his hand against the leather, sent them floating back to the floor within reach of one of the handrails. Seaton made his way to the power plant, lifted in one of the remaining bars, and applied a little power. The Skylark seemed to jump under them. Then it seemed as though they were back on Earth. Everything had its normal weight once more, as the amount of power applied was just enough to equal the acceleration of gravity. After this fact had been explained, Dorothy turned to Margaret. "Now that we are able to act intelligently, the party should be introduced to each other. Peggy, this is Dr. Dick Seaton, and this is Mr. Martin Crane. Boys, this is Miss Margaret Spencer, a dear friend of mine. These are the boys I have told you so much about, Peggy. Dick knows all about atoms and things. He found out how to make the Skylark go. Martin, who is quite a wonderful inventor, made the engines and things for it." "I may have heard of Mr. Crane," replied Margaret eagerly. "My father was an inventor, and I have heard him speak of a man named Crane who invented a lot of instruments for airplanes. He used to say that the Crane instruments revolutionized flying. I wonder if you are that, Mr. Crane?" "That is rather unjustifiably high praise, Miss Spencer," replied Crane, "but as I have been guilty of one or two things along that line, I may be the man he meant." "Pardon me if I seem to change the subject," put in Seaton, "but where's Duquesne?" "We came to at the same time, and he went into the galley to fix up something to eat." "Good for him!" exclaimed Dorothy. "I'm simply starved to death. I would have been demanding food long ago, but I have so many aches and pains that I didn't realize how hungry I was until you mentioned it. Come on, Peggy, I know where our room is. Let's go powder our noses while these bewhiskered gentlemen reap their beards. Did you bring along any of my clothes, Dick, or did you forget them in the excitement?" I didn't think anything about clothes, but Martin did. You'll find your whole wardrobe in your room. I'm with you, Dot, on that eating proposition. I'm hungry enough to eat the jam off the door." After the girls had gone, Seaton and Crane went to their rooms, where they exercised vigorously to restore the circulation to their numbed bodies, shaved, bathed, and returned to the saloon feeling like new men. They found the girls already there, seated at one of the windows. "Hail and greeting!" cried Dorothy at sight of them. "I hardly recognized you without your whiskers. Do hurry over here and look out this perfectly wonderful window. Did you ever in your born days see anything like this sight? Now that I'm not scared pea-green, I can enjoy it thoroughly." The two men joined the girls and peered out into space through the window, which was completely invisible, so clear was the glass. As the four heads bent so close together, an awed silence fell upon the little group. For the blackness of the interstellar void was not the dark of an earthly night, but the absolute black of the absence of all light, beside which the black of platinum dust is pale and grey. And laid upon this velvet were the jewel stars. They were not the twinkling, scintillating beauties of the earthly sky, but minute points so small as to seem dimensionless, yet of dazzling brilliance. Without the interference of the air, their rays met the eye steadily, and much of the effect of comparative distance was lost. All seemed nearer, and there was no hint of familiarity in their arrangement. Like gems thrown upon darkness, they shone in multicolored beauty upon the daring wanderers, who stood in their car as easily as though they were upon their parent earth, and gazed upon a sight never before seen by eye of man nor pictured in his imaginings. Through the days of their wonder, a thought smote Seaton like a blow from a fist. His eyes leaped to the instrument board, and he exclaimed, "Look there, Mart! We're heading almost directly away from the Earth, and we must be making billions of miles per second. After we lost consciousness, the attraction of that big dud back there would swing us around, of course, but the bar should have stayed pointed somewhere near the Earth as I left it. Do you suppose it could have shifted the gyroscopes?" "It not only could have, it did," replied Crane, turning the bar until it again pointed parallel with the object compass which bore upon the Earth. "Look at the board. The angle has been changed through nearly half a circumference. We couldn't carry gyroscopes heavy enough to counteract that force." "But they were heavier there? Oh, sure, you're right. It's mass, not weight, that counts. But we sure are in one fine, large jam now. Instead of being halfway back to the Earth, where are we, anyway?" They made a reading on an object compass focused upon the Earth. Seaton's face lengthened as seconds passed. When it had come to rest, both men calculated the distance. "What do you make it, Mart? I'm afraid to tell you my result." 46.27 light centuries, replied Crane calmly. Right, and the time was 11:32 p.m. of Thursday by the chronometer there. We'll time it again after a while and see how fast we're traveling. It's a good thing you built the ship's chronometers to stand any kind of stress. My watch is a total loss. Yours is too. All of our watches must be broken. We will have to repair them as soon as we get time. Well, let's eat next. No human being can stand my aching void much longer. How about you, Dot? Yes, for cat's sake, let's get busy. She mimicked him gaily. Dr. Duquesne's had dinner ready for ages, and we're all dying by inches of hunger. The wanderers, battered, bruised, and sore, seated themselves at a folding table, Seaton keeping a watchful eye upon the bar and upon the course, while enjoying Dorothy's presence to the full. Crane and Margaret talked easily, but at intervals. Save when directly addressed, Duquesne maintained silence, not the silence of one who knows himself to be an intruder, but the silence of perfect self-sufficiency. The meal over, the girls washed the dishes and busied themselves in the galley. Seaton and Crane made another observation upon the Earth, requesting Duquesne to stay out of the engine room, as they called the partially enclosed space surrounding the main instrument board, where were located the object compasses and the mechanism controlling the attractor, about which Duquesne knew nothing. As they rejoined Duquesne in the main compartment, Seaton said, Duquesne, we're nearly 5,000 light-years away from the Earth and are getting farther at the rate of about 1 light-year per minute. I suppose that it would be poor technique to ask how you know. It would, very poor. Our figures are right. The difficulty is that we have only 4 bars, enough to stop us and a little to spare, but not nearly enough to get back with, even if we could take a chance on drifting straight that far without being swung off, which, of course, is impossible. That means that we must land somewhere and dig some copper, then. Exactly. The first thing to do is to find a place to land. Seaton picked out a distant star in their course and observed it through the spectroscope. Since it was found to contain copper in notable amounts, all agreed that its planets probably also contained copper. "Don't know whether we can stop that soon or not," remarked Seaton as he set the livers, "but we may as well have something to shoot at. We'd better take our regular 12-hour tricks, hadn't we, Mart? It's a wonder we got as far as this without striking another snag. I'll take the first trick at the board. Beat it to bed." "Not so fast, Dick," argued Crane as Seaton turned toward the engine room. "It's my turn." "Flip a nickel," suggested Seaton. "Heads, I get it." Crane flipped a coin. Heads it was, and the worn-out party went to their rooms, all save Dorothy, who lingered after the others to bid her lover a more intimate good night. Seated beside him, his arm around her and her head upon his shoulder, Dorothy exclaimed, "Oh, Dickie, Dickie, it is wonderful to be with you again. I've lived as many years in the last week as we have covered miles." Seaton kissed her with ardor, then turned her fair face up to his and gazed hungrily at every feature. "It sure was awful until we found you, sweetheart girl. Those 2 days at Wilson's were the worst and longest I ever put in. I could have wrung Martin's cautious old neck. But isn't he a whiz at preparing for trouble? We sure owe him a lot, little dimpled lady." Dorothy was silent for a moment, then a smile quirked at one corner of her mouth, and a dimple appeared. Seaton promptly kissed it, whereupon it deepened audaciously. "What are you thinking about?" "Mischief," he asked. "Only of how Martin is going to be paid what we owe him," she answered teasingly. "Don't let the debt worry you any. Spill the news, Reddy," he commanded. As his arm tightened about her, she stuck out a tiny tip of red tongue at him. "Don't let Peggy find out he's a millionaire." "Why not?" he asked wonderingly. Then he saw her point and laughed. "You little matchmaker!" "I don't care. Laugh if you want to. Martin's as nice a man as I know, and Peggy's a real darling. Don't you let slip a word about Martin's money, that's all." She wouldn't think any less of him, would she? "Dick, sometimes you are absolutely dumb. It would spoil everything. If she knew he was a millionaire, she would be scared to death. Not of him, of course, but because she would think that he would think that she was chasing him, and then, of course, he would think that she was. See? As it is, she acts perfectly natural, and so does he. Didn't you notice that while we were eating they talked together for at least 15 minutes about her father's invention and the way they stole the plans and one thing and another? I don't believe he has talked that much to any girl except me the last 5 years, and he wouldn't talk to me until he knew that I couldn't see any man except you. Much as we like Martin, we've got to admit that about him. He's been chased so much that he's wild. If any other girl he knows had talked to him that long, he would have been off to the North Pole or somewhere the next morning, and the best part of it is that he didn't think anything of it. You think she is domesticating the wild man? Now, Dick, don't be foolish. You know what I mean. Martin is a perfect dear, but if she knew that he is the M. Reynolds Crane, everything would be ruined. You know yourself how horribly hard it is to get through his shell to the real Martin underneath. He is lonely and miserable inside, I know, and the right kind of girl, one that would treat him right, would make life heaven for him and herself too. Yes, and the wrong kind would make it. She would, interrupted Dorothy hastily. But Peggy's the right kind. Wouldn't it be fine to have Martin and Peggy as happy almost as you and I are? All right, girlie. I'm with you, he answered, embracing her as though he intended never to let her go. But you'd better go get some sleep. You're all in. Considerably later, when Dorothy had finally gone, Seaton settled himself for the long vigil. Promptly at the end of the 12 hours, Crane appeared, alert of eye and of bearing. "You look fresh as a daisy, Mart. Feeling fit?" "Fit as the proverbial fiddle. I could not have slept any better or longer if I had had a week off. 7 hours and a half is a luxury, you know." "All wrong, old top. I need 8 every night, and I'm going to take about 10 this time." "Go to it. 12 if you like. You have earned it." Seaton stumbled to his room and slept as though in a trance for 10 hours. Rising, he took his regular morning exercises and went into the saloon. All save Martin were there, but he had eyes only for his sweetheart, who was radiantly beautiful in a dress of deep bronze brown. "Good morning, Dick," she hailed him joyously. "You woke up just in time. We are all starving again, and we're just going to eat without you." "Good morning, everybody. I would like to eat with you, Dotty, but I've got to relieve Martin. How'd it be for you to bring breakfast into the engine room and cheer my solitude and let Crane eat with the others?" "Fine. That's once you had a good idea if you never have another." After the meal, Duquesne, who abhorred idleness with all his vigorous nature, took the watches of the party and went upstairs to the shop, which was a completely equipped mechanical laboratory, to repair them. Seaton stayed at the board, where Dorothy joined him as a matter of course. Crane and Margaret sat down at one of the windows. She told him her story, frankly and fully, shuddering with horror as she recalled the awful, helpless fall during which Perkins had met his end. "Dick and I have a heavy score to settle with that Steel crowd and with Duquesne," Crane said slowly. "We have no evidence that will hold in law, but someday Duquesne will overreach himself. We could convict him of abduction now, but the penalty for that is too mild for what he has done." "Perkins' death was not murder, then?" "Oh, no, it was purely self-defense. Perkins would have killed him if he could, and he really deserved it. Perkins was a perfect fiend. The doctor, as they call him, is no better, although entirely different. He is so utterly heartless and ruthless, so cold and scientific. Do you know him very well?" "We know all that about him and more." "And yet Dorothy said he saved her life?" "He did, from Perkins, but I still think it was because he didn't want Perkins meddling in his affairs. He seems to me to be the very incarnation of a fixed purpose, to advance himself in the world. That expresses my thoughts exactly. But he slips occasionally, as in this instance, and he will again. He will have to walk very carefully while he is with us. Nothing would please Dick better than an excuse for killing him, and I must admit that I feel very much the same way." "Yes, all of us do, and the way he acts proves what a machine he is. He knows just exactly how far to go and never goes beyond it." They felt the Skylark lurch slightly. "Oh, Mart," called Seaton. "Going to pass that star we were headed for. Too fast to stop. I'm giving it a wide berth and picking out another one. There's a big planet a few million miles off in line with the main door, and another one almost dead ahead. That is, straight down. We sure are traveling. Look at that sun flit by." They saw the 2 planets, one like a small moon, the other like a large star, and saw the strange sun increase rapidly in size as the Skylark at such a pace that any earthly distance would have been covered as soon as it was begun. So appalling was their velocity that their ship was bathed in the light of that sun for only a short time, then was again surrounded by the indescribable darkness. Their 72-hour flight without a pilot had seemed a miracle. Now it seemed entirely possible that they might fly in a straight line for weeks without encountering any obstacle. So vast was the emptiness in comparison with the points of light that punctuated it. Now and then they passed so close to a star that it apparently moved rapidly. But for the most part, the silent sentinels stood, like distant mountain peaks to the travellers in an express train, in the same position for many minutes. Awed by the immensity of the universe, the 2 at the window were silent, not with the silence of embarrassment, but with that of 2 friends in the presence of something beyond the reach of words. As they stared out into the infinity, each felt as never before the pitiful smallness of even our whole solar system and the utter insignificance of human beings and their works. Silently, their minds reached out to each other in mutual understanding. Unconsciously, Margaret half shuddered and moved closer to her companion, the movement attracting his attention, but not her own. A tender expression came into Crane's steady blue eyes as he looked down at the beautiful young woman by his side. For beautiful she undoubtedly was. Untroubled rest and plentiful food had erased the marks of her imprisonment. Dorothy's deep, manifestly unassumed faith in the ability of Seaton and Crane to bring them safely back to Earth had quieted her fears, and a complete costume of Dorothy's simple but well-cut clothes, which fitted her perfectly and in which she looked her best and knew it, had completely restored her self-possession. He quickly glanced away and again gazed at the stars, but now, in addition to the wonders of space, he saw masses of wavy black hair high-piled upon a queenly head, deep-down brown eyes half-veiled by long black lashes, sweet, sensitive lips, a firmly rounded but dimpled chin, and a perfectly formed young body. After a time she drew a deep, tremulous breath. As he turned, her eyes met his. In their shadowy depths, still troubled by the mystery of the unknowable, he read her very soul, the soul of a real woman. "I had hoped," said Margaret slowly, "to take a long flight above the clouds, but anything like this never entered my mind. How unbelievably great it is! So much vaster than any perception we could get upon Earth. It seems strange that we were ever awed by the sea or the mountains. And yet—" She paused, with her lip caught under two white teeth, then went on hesitatingly. "Doesn't it seem to you, Mr. Crane, that there is something in man as great as all this? Otherwise, Dorothy and I could not be sailing here in a wonder like the Lark, which you and Dick Seaton have made." Since, from the first, Dorothy had timed her waking hours with those of Seaton, waiting upon him, preparing his meals, and lightening the long hours of his vigils at the board, Margaret took it upon herself to do the same thing for Crane. But often they assembled in the engine-room, and there was much fun and laughter, as well as serious talk among the four. Margaret was quickly accepted as a friend and proved a delightful companion. Her wavy, jet-black hair, the only colour in the world that could hold its own with Dorothy's auburn glory, framed features self-reliant and strong, yet of womanly softness. And in this genial atmosphere, her quick tongue had a delicate wit and a facility of expression that delighted all three. Dorothy, after the manner of Southern women, became the hostess of this odd party, as she styled it, and unconsciously adopted the attitude of a lady in her own home. Early in their flight, Crane suggested that they should take notes upon the systems of stars through which they were passing. "I know very little of astronomy," he said to Seaton, "but with our telescope, spectroscope, and other instruments, we should be able to take some data that will be of interest to astronomers. Possibly Miss Spencer would be willing to help us?" "Sure," Seaton returned readily. "We'd be idiots to let a chance like this slide. Go to it." Margaret was delighted at the opportunity to help. "Taking notes is the best thing I do," she cried, and called for a pad and pencil. Stationed at the window, they fell to work in earnest. For several hours, Crane took observations, calculated distances, and dictated notes to Margaret. "The stars are wonderfully different," she exclaimed to him once. "That planet, I'm sure, has strange and lovely life upon it. See how its colour differs from most of the others we have seen so near. It is rosy and soft like a home fire. I'm sure its people are happy." They fell into a long discussion, laughing a little at their fancies. Were these multitudes of worlds peopled as the Earth? Could it be that only upon Earth had occurred the right combination for the generation of life, so that the rest of the universe was unpeopled? "It is unthinkable that they are all uninhabited," mused Crane. "There must be life. The beings may not exist in any form with which we are familiar. They may well be fulfilling some purpose in ways so different from ours that we should be unable to understand them at all." Margaret's eyes widened in startled apprehension, but in a moment she shook herself and laughed. "But there's no reason to suppose they would be awful," she remarked, and turned with renewed interest to the window. Thus days went by, and the Skylark passed one solar system after another with a velocity so great that it was impossible to land upon any planet. Margaret's association with Crane, begun as a duty, soon became an intense pleasure for them both. Taking notes or seated at the board in companionable conversation or sympathetic silence, They compressed into a few days more real companionship than is ordinarily enjoyed in months. Oftener and oftener, as time went on, Crane found the vision of his dream home floating in his mind as he steered the Skylark in her meteoric flight, or as he strapped himself into his narrow bed. Now, however, the central figure of the vision, instead of being an indistinct blur, was clear and sharply defined, and for her part, more and more was Margaret drawn to the quiet and unassuming but utterly dependable and steadfast young inventor, with his wide knowledge and his keen, incisive mind. Sometimes, when far from any star, the pilot would desert his post and join the others at meals. Upon one such occasion, Seaton asked, "How's the book on astronomy? Oh, learned ones." "It will be as interesting as Egyptian hieroglyphics," Margaret replied, as she opened her notebook and showed him pages of figures and symbols. "May I see it, Miss Spencer?" asked Quinn from across the small table, extending his hand. She looked at him, hot hostility in her brown eyes, and he dropped his hand. "I beg your pardon," he said with amused irony. After the meal, Seaton and Crane held a short consultation, and the former called to the girls, asking them to join in the council of war. There was a moment's silence before Crane said diffidently, "We have been talking about Duquesne, Miss Spencer, trying to decide a very important problem." Seaton smiled in spite of himself as the colour again deepened in Margaret's face, and Dorothy laughed outright. "Talk about a red-headed temper! Your hair must be dyed, Peggy." "I know I acted like a naughty child," Margaret said ruefully, "but he makes me perfectly furious and scares me at the same time. A few more remarks like that, I beg your pardon of his, and I wouldn't have a thought left in my head." Seaton, who had opened his mouth, shut it again ludicrously, without saying a word, and Margaret gave him a startled glance. "Now I have said it!" she exclaimed. "I'm not afraid of him, boys, really. What do you want me to do?" Seaton plunged in. "What we were trying to get up nerve enough to say is that he'd be a good man on the astronomy job." And Crane added quickly, "He undoubtedly knows more about it than I do, and it would be a pity to lose the chance of using him. Besides, Dick and I think it rather dangerous to leave him so much time to himself, in which to work up a plan against us." "He's cooking one right now, I'll bet a hat," Seaton put in, and Crane added, "If you are sure that you have no objections, Miss Spencer, we might go below, where we can have it dark, and all three of us see what we can make of the stargazing. We are really losing an unusual opportunity." Margaret hid gallantly any reluctance she might have felt. "I wouldn't deserve to be here if I can't work with the doctor and hate him at the same time." "Good for you, Peg. You're a regular fellow," Seaton exclaimed. "You're a trump." Finally, the enormous velocity of the cruiser was sufficiently reduced to effect a landing. A copper-bearing sun was located, and a course was laid toward its nearest planet. As the vessel approached its goal, a deep undercurrent of excitement kept all the passengers feverishly occupied. They watched the distant globe grow larger, glowing through its atmosphere more and more clearly as a great disk of white light, its outline softened by the air about it. 2 satellites were close beside it. Its sun, a great blazing orb, a little nearer than the planet, looked so great and so hot that Margaret became uneasy. "Isn't it dangerous to get so close? Dick, we might burn up, mightn't we?" "Not without an atmosphere," he laughed. "Oh," murmured the girl apologetically, "I might have known that." Dropping rapidly into the atmosphere of the planet, they measured its density and analyzed it in apparatus installed for that purpose, finding that its composition was very similar to the Earth's air and that its pressure was not enough greater to be uncomfortable. When within 1,000 feet of the surface, Seaton weighed a 5-pound weight upon a spring balance, finding that it weighed 5.5 pounds, thus ascertaining that the planet was either somewhat larger than the Earth or more dense. The ground was almost hidden by a rank growth of vegetation, but here and there appeared glade-like openings. Seaton glanced at the faces about him. Tense interest marked them all. Dorothy's cheeks were flushed, her eyes shone. She looked at him with awe and pride. "A strange world, Dorothy," he said gravely. "You are not afraid?" "Not with you," she answered. "I am only thrilled with wonder." "Columbus at San Salvador," said Margaret, her dark eyes paying their tribute of admiration. A dark flush mounted swiftly into Seaton's brown face, and he sought to throw most of the burden upon Crane, but catching upon his face also a look of praise, almost of tenderness, he quickly turned the controls. "Man the boats!" "Sht!" He ordered an imaginary crew, and the Skylark descended rapidly. Landing upon one of the open spaces, they found the ground solid and stepped out. What had appeared to be a glade was in reality a rock, or rather a ledge of apparently solid metal, with scarcely a loose fragment to be seen. At one end of the ledge rose a giant tree, wonderfully symmetrical but of a peculiar form. Its branches were longer at the top than at the bottom, and it possessed broad, dark green leaves, long thorns, and odd, flexible shoot-like tendrils. It stood as an outpost of the dense vegetation beyond. Totally unlike the forests of Earth were those fern-like trees, towering 200 feet into the air. They were of an intensely vivid green and stood motionless in the still, hot air of noonday. Not a sign of animal life was to be seen. The whole landscape seemed asleep. The 5 strangers stood near their vessel, conversing in low tones and enjoying the sensation of solid ground beneath their feet. After a few minutes, Duquesne remarked, "This is undoubtedly a newer planet than ours. I should say that it was in the Carboniferous age. Aren't those trees like those in the coal measures, Seaton?" "True as time, Blackie. There probably won't be a human race here for ages, unless we bring out some colonists." Seaton kicked at one of the loose lumps of metal questioningly with his heavy shoe, finding that it was as immovable as though it were part of the ledge. Bending over, he found that it required all his great strength to lift it, and he stared at it with an expression of surprise, which turned to amazement as he peered closer. "Duquesne, look at this!" Duquesne studied the metal and was shaken out of his habitual taciturnity. "Platinum! By all the little gods!" "We'll grab some of this while the grabbing's good," announced Seaton, and the few visible lumps were rolled into the car. "If we had a pickaxe, we could chop some more off one of those sharp ledges down there." "There's an axe in the shop," replied Duquesne. "I'll go get it. Go ahead. I'll soon be with you." "Keep close together," warned Crane as the 4 moved slowly down the slope. "This is none too safe, Dick." "No, it isn't, Mart. But we've got to see whether we can't find some copper, and I would like to get some more of this stuff too. I don't think it's platinum. I believe that it's X." As they reached the broken projections, Margaret glanced back over her shoulder and screamed. The others saw that her face was white and her eyes wide with horror, and Seaton instinctively drew his pistol as he whirled about, only to check his finger on the trigger and lower his hand. "Nothing but explosive bullets," he growled in disgust, and in helpless silence the 4 watched an unspeakably hideous monster slowly appear from behind the Skylark. Its 4 huge squat legs supported a body at least 100 feet long, pursy and ungainly. At the extremity of a long and sinuous neck, a comparatively small head seemed composed entirely of a cavernous mouth, armed with row upon row of carnivorous teeth. Dorothy gasped with terror, and both girls shrank closer to the 2 men, who maintained a baffled silence as the huge beast passed his revolting head along the hull of the vessel. "I dare not shoot, Martin," Seaton whispered. "It would wreck the bus. Have you got any solid bullets?" "No, we must hide behind these small ledges until it goes away," answered Crane, his eyes upon Margaret's colourless face. "You 2 hide behind that one. We will take this one." "Oh, well, it's nothing to worry about anyway. We can kill him as soon as he gets far enough away from the boat," said Seaton as, with Dorothy clinging to him, he dropped behind one of the ledges. Margaret, her staring eyes fixed upon the monster, remained standing until Crane touched her gently and drew her down beside him. "He will go away soon," his even voice assured her. "We are in no danger." In spite of their predicament, a feeling of happiness flowed through Crane's whole being as he crouched beside the wall of metal with one arm protectingly around Margaret, and he longed to protect her through life as he was protecting her then. Accustomed as he was to dangerous situations, he felt no fear. He felt only a great tenderness for the girl by his side, who had ceased trembling but was still staring wide-eyed at the monster through a crevice. "Scared, Peggy?" he whispered. "Not now, Martin, but if you weren't here, I would die of fright." At this reply, his arm tightened involuntarily, but he forced it to relax. "It will not be long," he promised himself silently, "until she is back at home among her friends, and then—" There came the crack of a rifle from the Skylark. There was an awful roar from the dinosaur, which was quickly silenced by a stream of machine-gun bullets. "Blackie's on the job! Let's go!" cried Seaton, and they raced up the slope. Making a detour to avoid the writhing and mutilated mass, they plunged through the opening door. Duquesne shut it behind them, and in overwhelming relief the adventurers huddled together as from the wilderness without there arose an appalling tumult. The scene, so quiet a few moments before, was instantly changed. The trees, the swamp, and the air seemed filled with monsters so hideous as to stagger the imagination. Winged lizards of prodigious size hurtled through the air, plunging to death against the armored hull. Indescribable flying monsters with feathers like birds but with the fangs of tigers attacked viciously. Dorothy screamed and started back as a scorpion-like thing with a body 10 feet in length leaped at the window in front of her, its terrible sting spraying the glass with venom. As it fell to the ground, a huge spider, if an 8-legged creature with spines instead of hair, many-faceted eyes, and a bloated globular body weighing hundreds of pounds may be called a spider, leaped upon it, and, mighty mandibles against poisonous sting, the furious battle raged. Several 12-foot cockroaches climbed nimbly across the fallen timber of the morass and began feeding voraciously upon the body of the dead dinosaur, only to be driven away by another animal, which all three men recognized instantly as that king of all prehistoric creatures, the saber-toothed tiger. This newcomer, a tawny beast towering 15 feet high at the shoulder, had a mouth disproportionate even to his great size, a mouth armed with 4 great tiger teeth more than 3 feet in length. He had barely begun his meal, however, when he was challenged by another nightmare, something apparently halfway between a dinosaur and a crocodile. At the first note, the tiger charged, clawing, striking, rending each other with their terrible teeth. A veritable avalanche of bloodthirsty rage, the combatants stormed up and down the little island. But the fighters were rudely interrupted, and the earthly visitors discovered that in this primitive world it was not only animal life that was dangerous. The great tree standing on the farther edge of the island suddenly bent over, lashing out like a snake and grasping both. It transfixed them with the terrible thorns, which were now seen to be armed with needle points, and to possess barbs like fishhooks. It ripped at them with the long branches, which were veritable spears. The broad leaves, armed with revolting sucking discs, closed about the two animals, while the long, slender twigs, each of which was now seen to have an eye at its extremity, waved about, watching each movement of the captives from a safe distance. If the struggle between the two animals had been awful, this was titanic. The air was torn by the roars of the reptile, the screams of the great cat, and the shrieks of the tree. The very ground rocked with the ferocity of the conflict. There could be but one result. Soon the tree, having absorbed the two gladiators, resumed its upright position in all its beauty. The members of the little group stared at each other, sick at heart. "This is no place to start a copper mine. I think we'd better beat it," remarked Seaton presently, wiping drops of perspiration from his forehead. "I think so," acquiesced Crane. "We found air and earth-like conditions here. We probably will elsewhere." "Are you all right, Dotty?" asked Seaton. "All right, Dickie," she replied, the colour flowing back into her cheeks. "It scared me stiff, and I think I have a lot of white hairs right now, but I wouldn't have missed it for anything." She paused an instant and continued, "Dick, there must be a queer streak of brutality in me, but would you mind blowing up that frightful tree? I wouldn't mind its nature if it were ugly, but look at it. It's so deceptively beautiful. You wouldn't think it had the disposition of a fiend, would you?" A general laugh relieved the nervous tension, and Seaton stepped impulsively toward Duquesne with his hand outstretched. "You've squared your account, Blackie. Say the word and the war's all off." Duquesne ignored the hand and glanced coldly at the group of eager, friendly faces. "Don't be sentimental," he remarked evenly as he turned away to his room. Emotional scenes pain me. I gave my word to act as one of the party." "Well, may I be kicked to death by little red spiders!" exclaimed Seaton, dumbfounded, as the other disappeared. "He ain't a man. He's a fish. He's a machine. I always thought so, and now I know it," stated Margaret, and the others nodded agreement. "Well, we'll sure pull his cork as soon as we get back," snapped Seaton. "He asked for it, and we'll give him both barrels." "I know I acted the fool out there," Margaret apologized, flushing hotly and looking at Crane. "I don't know what made me act so stupid. I used to have a little nerve." "You were a regular little brick, Peg," Seaton returned instantly. "Both you girls are all to the good, the right kind to have along in ticklish places." Crane held out his steady hand and took Margaret's in a warm clasp. "For a girl in your weakened condition, you were wonderful. You have no reason to reproach yourself." Tears filled the dark eyes, but were held back bravely as she held her head erect and returned the pressure of his hand. "Just so you don't leave me behind next time," she returned lightly, and the last word concerning the incident had been said. Seaton applied the power, and soon they were approaching another planet, which was surrounded by a dense fog. Descending slowly, they found it to be a mass of boiling hot steam and rank vapors under enormous pressure. The next planet they found had a clear atmosphere, but the ground had a peculiar barren look, and analysis of the gaseous envelope proved it to be composed almost entirely of chlorine. No life of an earthly type could be possible upon such a world, and a search for copper, even with the suits and helmets, would probably be fruitless if not impossible. "Well," remarked Seaton as they were again in space, "we've got enough copper to visit several more worlds, several more solar systems if necessary, but there's a nice, hopeful-looking planet right in front of us. It may be the one we're looking for." Arrived in the belt of atmosphere, they tested it as before and found it satisfactory. Chapter 12. The Mastery of Mind over Matter. They descended rapidly, directly over a large and imposing city in the middle of a vast, level, beautifully planted plain. While they were watching it, the city vanished and the plain was transformed into a heavily timbered mountain summit, the valleys falling away upon all sides as far as the eye could reach. "Well, I'll say that's some mirage," exclaimed Seaton, rubbing his eyes in astonishment. "I've seen mirages before, but never anything like that. Wonder what this air's made of. But we'll land anyway if we finally have to swim." The ship landed gently upon the summit, the occupants half expecting to see the ground disappear before their eyes. Nothing happened, however, and they disembarked, finding walking somewhat difficult because of the great mass of the planet. Looking around, they could see no sign of life, but they felt a presence near them, a vast, invisible something. Suddenly, out of the air in front of Seaton, a man materialized, a man identical with him in every feature and detail, even to the smudge of grease under one eye, the small wrinkles in his heavy blue serge suit, and the emblem of the American Chemical Society upon his watch fob. "Hello, folks," the stranger began in Seaton's characteristic careless speech. "I see you're surprised at my knowing your language. You're a very inferior race of animals, don't even understand telepathy, don't understand the luminiferous ether or the relation between time and space. Your greatest things, such as the Skylark and your object compass, are merely toys." Changing instantly from Seaton's form to that of Dorothy, likewise a perfect imitation, the stranger continued without a break. "Atoms and electrons and things, spinning and whirling in their dizzy little orbits." It broke off abruptly, continuing in the form of Duquesne. "Couldn't make myself clear as Miss Vanneman, not a scientific convolution in her foolish little brain. You are a freer type, Duquesne, unhampered by foolish soft fancies, but you are very clumsy, although working fairly well with your poor tools. Brookings and his organization, the Perkins Cafe and its clumsy wireless telephones. All of you are extremely low in the scale. Such animals have not been known in our universe for 10 million years, which is as far back as I can remember. You have millions of years to go before you will amount to anything, before you will even rise above death and its attendant necessity, sex." The strange being then assumed form after form with bewildering rapidity, while the spectators stared in dumb astonishment. In rapid succession, it took on the likeness of each member of the party, of the vessel itself, of the watch in Seaton's pocket, reappearing as Seaton. "Well, Bunch," it said in a matter-of-fact voice, "there's no mental exercise in you, and you're such a low form of life that you're of no use on this planet, so I'll dematerialize you." A peculiar light came into its eyes as they stared intently into Seaton's, and he felt his senses reel under the impact of an awful mental force, but he fought back with all his power and remained standing. "What's this?" the stranger demanded in surprise. "This is the first time in history that mere matter, which is only a manifestation of mind, has ever refused to obey mind. There's a screw loose somewhere." "I must reason this out," it continued analytically, changing instantaneously into Crane's likeness. "Ah! I am not a perfect reproduction. This is the first matter I have ever encountered that I could not reproduce perfectly. There is some subtle difference. The external form is the same, the organic structure likewise. The molecules of substance are arranged as they should be, as are also the atoms in the molecule. The electrons in the atom, there is the difficulty. The arrangement and number of electrons, as well as positive charges, are entirely different from what I had supposed. I must derive the formula. Let's go, folks," said Seaton hastily, drawing Dorothy back toward the Skylark. "This dematerialization stunt may be play for him, but I don't want any of it in my family." "No, you really must stay," remonstrated the stranger. "Much as it is against my principles to employ brute force, you must stay and be properly dematerialized, alive or dead. Science demands it." As he spoke, he started to draw his automatic pistol. Being in Crane's form, he drew slowly as Crane did, and Seaton, with the dexterity of much sleight-of-hand work and of years of familiarity with his weapon, drew and fired in one incredibly rapid movement before the other had withdrawn the pistol from his pocket. The explosive shell completely volatilized the stranger and hurled the party backward toward the Skylark, into which they fled hastily. As Crane, the last one to enter the vessel, fired his pistol and closed the massive door, Seaton leaped to the levers. As he did so, he saw a creature materialize in the air of the vessel and fall to the floor with a crash as he threw on the power. It was a frightful thing, like nothing ever before seen upon any world, with great teeth, long, sharp claws, and an automatic pistol clutched firmly in a human hand. Forced flat by the terrific acceleration of the vessel, it was unable to lift either itself or the weapon, and lay helpless. "We take one trick anyway," blazed Seaton as he threw on the power of the attractor and diffused its force into a screen over the party, so that the enemy could not materialize in the air above them and crush them by mere weight. As pure mental force, you're entirely out of my class, but when you come down to matter, which I can understand, I'll give you a run for your money until my angles catch fire." "That is a childish defiance. It speaks well for your courage, but ill for your intelligence," the animal said, and vanished. A moment later, Seaton's hair almost stood on end as he saw an automatic pistol appear upon the board directly in front of him, clamped to it by bands of steel. Paralyzed by this unlooked-for demonstration of the mastery of mind over matter, unable to move a muscle, he lay helpless, staring at the engine of death in front of him. Although the whole proceeding occupied only a fraction of a second, it seemed to Seaton as though he watched the weapon for hours. As the sleeve drew back, cocking the pistol and throwing a cartridge into the chamber, the trigger moved, and the hammer descended to speed on its way the bullet which was to blot out his life. There was a sharp click as the hammer fell. Seaton was surprised to find himself still alive until a voice spoke, apparently from the muzzle of the pistol, with the harsh sound of a metallic diaphragm. "I was almost certain that it wouldn't explode," the stranger said chattily. "You see, I haven't derived that formula yet, so I couldn't make a real explosive. I could, of course, materialize beside you, under your protective screen, and crush you in a vice. I could materialize as a man of metal, able to stand up under this acceleration and do you to death. I could even, by a sufficient expenditure of mental energy, materialize a planet around your ship and crush it. However, these crude methods are distasteful in the extreme, especially since you have already given me some slight and unexpected mental exercise. In return, I shall give you one chance for your lives. I cannot dematerialize either you or your vessel until I work out the formula for your peculiar atomic structure. If I can derive the formula before you reach the boundaries of my home space, beyond which I cannot go, I shall let you go free. Deriving the formula will be a neat little problem. It should be fairly easy, as it involves only a simple integration in 97 dimensions. Silence ensued, and Seaton advanced his lever to the limit of his ability to retain consciousness. Almost overcome by the horror of their position, in an agony of suspense, expecting every instant to be hurled into nothingness, he battled on with no thought of yielding, even in the face of those overwhelming mental odds. "You can't do it, old top," he thought savagely, concentrating all the power of his highly trained mind against the intellectual monster. "You can't dematerialize us, and you can't integrate above 95 dimensions to save your neck. You can't do it. You're slipping. You're all balled up right now." For more than an hour the silent battle raged, during which time the Skylark flew millions upon millions of miles toward Earth. Finally, the stranger spoke again. "You three we win," it said abruptly. In answer to the unspoken surprise of all three men, it went on. "Yes, all three of you got the same idea, and Crane even forced his body to retain consciousness to fight me. Your efforts were very feeble, of course, but were enough to interrupt my calculations at a delicate stage every time. You are a low form of life, undoubtedly, but with more mentality than I supposed at first. I could get that formula, of course, in spite of you, if I had time, but we are rapidly approaching the limits of my territory, outside of which even I could not think my way back. That is one thing in which your mechanical devices are superior to anything my own race developed before we became pure intellectuals. They point the way back to your Earth, which is so far away that even my mentality cannot grasp the meaning of the distance. I can understand the Earth, can visualize it from your minds, but I cannot project myself any nearer to it than we are at present. Before I leave you, I will say that you have conferred a real favor upon me. You have given me something to think about for thousands of cycles to come. Goodbye." Assured that their visitor had really gone, Seaton reduced the power to that of gravity, and Dorothy soon sat up, Margaret reviving more slowly. "Dick," said Dorothy solemnly, "did that happen, or have I been unconscious and just had a nightmare?" "It happened, all right," returned her lover, wiping his brow in relief. "See that pistol clamped upon the top of the board? That's a token in remembrance of him." Dorothy, though she had been only half conscious, had heard the words of the stranger. As she looked at the faces of the men, white and drawn with the mental struggle, she realized what they had gone through, and she drew Seaton down into one of the seats, stroking his hair tenderly. Margaret went to her room immediately, and as she did not return, Dorothy followed. She came back presently with a look of concern upon her face. "This life is a little hard on Peggy. I didn't realize how much harder for her it would be than it is for me until I went in there and found her crying. It is much harder for her, of course, since I am with you, Dick, and with you, Martin, whom I know so well. She must feel terribly alone." "Why should she?" demanded Seaton. "We think she's some game little guy. Why, she's one of the bunch. She must know that." "Well, it isn't the same," insisted Dorothy. "You be extra nice to her, Dick, but don't you dare let her know I told you about the tears, or she'd eat me alive." Crane said nothing, a not unusual occurrence, but his face grew thoughtful, and his manner, when Margaret appeared at mealtime, was more solicitous than usual, and more than brotherly in its tenderness. "I shall be an interstellar diplomat," Dorothy whispered to Seaton as soon as they were alone. "Wasn't that a beautiful bee I put upon Martin?" Seaton stared at her a moment, then shook her gently before he took her into his arms. The information, however, did not prevent him from calling to Crane a few minutes later, even though he was still deep in conversation with Margaret. Dorothy gave him an exasperated glance and walked away. "I sure pulled a boner that time," Seaton muttered as he plucked at his hair ruefully. "It nearly did us. Let's test this stuff out and see if it's X smart while DeQuain's out of the way. If it is X, it's some find." Seaton cut off a bit of metal with his knife, hammered it into a small piece of copper, and threw the copper into the power chamber, out of contact with the plating. As the metal received the current, the vessel started slightly. "It is X, Mott! We've got enough of this stuff to supply 3 worlds!" "Better put it away somewhere," suggested Crane, and after the metal had been removed to Seaton's cabin, the 2 men again sought a landing place. Almost in their line of flight, they saw a close cluster of stars, each emitting a peculiar greenish light, which, in the spectroscope, revealed a blaze of copper lines. "That's our meat, Martin. We ought to be able to grab some copper in that system, where there's so much of it that it colors their sunlight." "The copper is undoubtedly there, but it might be too dangerous to get so close to so many suns. We may have trouble getting away." "Well, our copper's getting horribly low. We've got to find some pretty quick somewhere, or else walk back home, and there's our best chance. We'll feel our way along. If it gets too strong, we'll beat it." When they had approached so close that the suns were great stars widely spaced in the heavens, Crane relinquished the controls to Seaton. "If you will take the lever a while, Dick, Margaret and I will go downstairs and see if we can locate a planet." After a glance through the telescope, Crane knew that they were still too far from the group of suns to place any planet with certainty, and began taking notes. His mind was not upon his work, however, but was completely filled with thoughts of the girl at his side. The intervals between his comments became longer and longer until they were standing in silence, both staring with unseeing eyes out into the trackless void. But it was in no sense their usual companionable silence. Crane was fighting back the words he longed to say. This lovely girl was not here of her own accord. She had been torn forcibly from her home and from her friends, and he could not, make her already difficult position even more unpleasant by forcing his attentions upon her. Margaret sensed something unusual and significant in his attitude and held herself tense, her heart beating wildly. At that moment, an asteroid came within range of the Skylark's watchful repeller, and at the lurch of the vessel, as it swung around the obstruction, Margaret would have fallen had not Crane instinctively caught her with one arm. Ordinarily, this bit of courtesy would have gone unnoticed by both, as it had happened many times before, but in that heavily charged atmosphere it took on a new significance. Both blushed hotly, and as their eyes met, each saw that which held them spellbound. Slowly, almost as if without volition, Crane put his other arm around her. A wave of deeper crimson swept over her face, and she bent her handsome head as her slender body yielded to his arms with no effort to free itself. Finally, Crane spoke, his usually even voice faltering. "Margaret, I hope you will not think this unfair of me, but we have been through so much together that I feel as though we had known each other forever. Until we went through this last experience, I had intended to wait. But why should we wait? Life is not lived in years alone, and you know how much I love you, my dearest," he finished passionately. Her arms crept up around his neck, her bowed head lifted, and her eyes looked deep into his as she whispered her answer. "I think I do. Oh, Martin." Presently they made their way back to the engine room, keeping the singing joy in their hearts inaudible and the kisses fresh upon their lips invisible. They might have kept their secret for a time, had not Seaton promptly asked, "Well, what did you find, Mart?" A panicky look appeared upon Crane's self-possessed countenance, and Margaret's fair face glowed like a peony. "Yes, what did you find?" demanded Dorothy, as she noticed their confusion. "My future wife," Crane answered steadily. The 2 girls rushed into each other's arms, and the 2 men silently gripped hands in a clasp of steel, for each of the 4 knew that these 2 unions were not passing fancies, lightly entered into and as lightly cast aside, but were true partnerships which would endure throughout the entire span of life. A planet was located, and the Skylark flew toward it. Discovering that it was apparently situated in the center of the cluster of suns, they hesitated, but finding that there was no dangerous force present, they kept on. As they drew nearer, so that the planet appeared as a very small moon, they saw that the Skylark was in a blaze of green light, and looking out of the windows, Crane counted 17 great suns scattered in all directions in the sky. Slowing down abruptly as the planet was approached, Seaton dropped the vessel slowly through the atmosphere while Crane and Duquesne tested and analyzed it. Pressure, 30 pounds per square inch. Surface gravity as compared to that of the Earth, 2/5. Air pressure about double that of the Earth, while a 5-pound weight weighs only 2 pounds. A peculiar combination, reported Crane, and Duquesne added, analysis about the same as our air, except for 2 3/10% of a gas that isn't poisonous and which has a peculiar fragrant odor. I can't analyze it and think it probably an element unknown upon Earth, or at least very rare. It would have to be rare if you don't know what it is, acknowledged Seaton, locking the Skylark in place and going over to smell the strange gas. Deciding that the air was satisfactory, the pressure inside the vessel was slowly raised to the value of that outside, and 2 doors were opened to allow the new atmosphere free circulation. Seaton shut off the power actuating the repeller and let the vessel settle slowly toward the ocean, which was directly beneath them, an ocean of a deep, intense, wondrously beautiful blue, which the scientists studied with interest. Arrived at the surface, Seaton moistened a rod in a wave and tasted it cautiously, then uttered a yell of joy, a yell broken off abruptly as he heard the sound of his own voice. Both girls started as the vibrations set up in the dense air smote upon their eardrums. Seaton moderated his voice and continued, I forgot about the air pressure, but hurrah for this ocean! It's ammoniacal copper sulfate solution. We can sure get all the copper we want right here, but it would take weeks to evaporate the water and recover the metal. We can probably get it easier ashore. Let's go! They started off just above the surface of the ocean toward the nearest continent, which they had observed from the air. My future wife, Crane answered steadily. The 2 girls rushed into each other's arms, and the 2 men silently gripped hands in a clasp of steel, for each of the 4 knew that these 2 unions were not passing fancies, lightly entered into and as lightly cast aside, but were true partnerships which would endure throughout the entire span of life. A planet was located, and the Skylark flew toward it. Discovering that it was apparently situated in the center of the cluster of suns, they hesitated, but finding that there was no dangerous force present, they kept on. As they drew nearer so that the planet appeared as a very small moon, they saw that the Skylark was in a blaze of green light, and looking out of the windows, Crane counted 17 great suns scattered in all directions in the sky. Slowing down abruptly as the planet was approached, Seaton dropped the vessel slowly through the atmosphere while Crane and Duquesne tested and analyzed it. Pressure, 30 pounds per square inch. Surface gravity as compared to that of the Earth, 2/5. Air pressure about double that of the Earth, while a 5-pound weight weighs only 2 pounds. A peculiar combination, reported Crane, and Duquesne added, analysis about the same as our air, except for 2 3/10% of a gas that isn't poisonous and which has a peculiar fragrant odor. I can't analyze it and think it probably an element unknown upon Earth, or at least very rare. It would have to be rare if you don't know what it is, acknowledged Seaton, locking the Skylark in place and going over to smell the strange gas. Deciding that the air was satisfactory, the pressure inside the vessel was slowly raised to the value of that outside, and 2 doors were opened to allow the new atmosphere free circulation. Seaton shut off the power actuating the repeller and let the vessel settle slowly toward the ocean, which was directly beneath them, an ocean of a deep, intense, wondrously beautiful blue, which the scientists studied with interest. Arrived at the surface, Seaton moistened a rod in a wave and tasted it cautiously, then uttered a yell of joy, a yell broken off abruptly as he heard the sound of his own voice. Both girls started as the vibrations set up in the dense air smote upon their eardrums. Seaton moderated his voice and continued, I forgot about the air pressure. But hurrah for this ocean! It's ammoniacal copper sulfate solution. We can sure get all the copper we want right here, but it would take weeks to evaporate the water and recover the metal. We can probably get it easier ashore. Let's go!" They started off just above the surface of the ocean toward the nearest continent, which they had observed from the air. "We can't stand for anything like that," cried Seaton as he threw on the power and the Skylark leaped ahead. "Get ready to bump him off, Mart, when I jerk him away. He acts hard-boiled, so give him a real one, 50 milligrams." Sweeping on with awful speed, the monster seized the largest and most gaily decorated plane in his 100-foot tentacles just as the Skylark came within sighting distance. In 4 practically simultaneous movements, Seaton sighted the attractor at the ugly beak, released all its power, pointed the main bar of the Skylark directly upward, and advanced his speed lever. There was a crash of rending metal as the thing was torn loose from the plane and jerked 100 miles into the air, struggling so savagely in that invisible and incomprehensible grip that the 3,000-ton mass of the Skylark tossed and pitched like a child's plaything. Those inside her heard the sharp, spiteful crack of the machine gun, and an instant later they heard a report that paralyzed their senses, even inside the vessel and in the thin air of their enormous elevation, as the largest explosive bullet prepared by the inventors struck full upon the side of the hideous body. There was no smoke, no gas or vapor of any kind, only a huge volume of intolerable flame as the energy stored within the atoms of copper, instantaneously liberated, heated to incandescence and beyond all the atmosphere within a radius of hundreds of feet. The monster disappeared utterly, and Seaton, with unerring hand, reversed the bar and darted back down toward the fleet of airships. He reached them in time to focus the attractor upon the wrecked and helpless plane in the middle of its 5,000-foot fall and lowered it gently to the ground, surrounded by the fleet. The Skylark landed easily beside the wrecked machine, and the wanderers saw that their vessel was completely surrounded by a crowd of people. Men and women identical in form and feature with themselves. They were a superbly moulded race, the men fully as large as Seaton and Duquesne. The women, while smaller than the men, were noticeably taller than the 2 women in the car. The men wore broad collars of metal, numerous metallic ornaments, and heavily jeweled leather belts and shoulder straps which were hung with weapons of peculiar patterns. The women carried no weapons, but were even more highly decorated than were the men. Each slender, perfectly formed body scintillated with the brilliance of hundreds of strange gems, flashing points of fire. Jeweled bands of metal and leather restrained their carefully groomed hair, jeweled collars encircled their throats, jeweled belts, jeweled bracelets, jeweled anklets, each added its quota of brilliance to the glittering whole. The strangers wore no clothing, and their smooth skins shone a dark, livid, utterly indescribable color in the peculiar, unearthly, yellowish-bluish-green glare of the light. Green their skins undoubtedly were, but not any shade of green visible in the earthly spectrum. The whites of their eyes were a light yellowish-green. The heavy hair of the women and the close-cropped locks of the men were green as well, a green so dark as to be almost black, as were also their eyes. "Well, what do you know about that?" pondered Seaton dazedly. "They're human, right enough, but ye gods, what a colour!" "It is hard to tell how much of that colour is real, and how much of it is due to this light," answered Crane. "Wait until you get outside, away from our daylight lamps, and you will probably look like a Chinese puzzle. As to the form, it is logical to suppose that wherever conditions are similar to those upon the Earth, and the age is anywhere nearly the same, development would be along the same lines as with us." "That's right, too. Dotty, your hair will sure look gorgeous in this light. Let's go out and give the natives a treat." "I wouldn't look like that for $1 million, retorted Dorothy. "And if I'm going to look like that, I won't get out of the ship, so there." "Cheer up, Dotty, you won't look like that. Your hair will be black in this light." "Then what colour will mine be?" asked Margaret. Seaton glanced at her black hair. "Probably a very dark and beautiful green," he grinned, his grey eyes sparkling. "But we'll have to wait and see. Friends and fellow countrymen, I've got a hunch that this is going to be some visit. How about it? Shall we go ahead with it?" Dorothy went up to him, her face bright with eagerness. "Oh, what a lark! Let's go!" Even in Duquesne's cold presence, Margaret's eyes sought those of her lover, and his sleeve barely touching her arm was enough to send a dancing thrill along it. "Onward, men of Earth!" she cried, and Seaton, stepping up to the window, rapped sharply upon the glass with the butt of his pistol and raised both hands high above his head in the universal sign of peace. In response, a man of Herculean mould, so splendidly decorated that his harness was one blazing mass of jewels, waved his arm and shouted a command. The crowd promptly fell back, leaving a clear space of several hundred yards. The man, evidently one in high command, unbuckled his harness, dropping every weapon, and advanced toward the Skylark, both arms upraised in Seaton's gesture. Seaton went to the door and started to open it. "Better talk to him from inside," cautioned Crane. "I don't think so, Mart." "He's peaceable, and I've got my gun in my pocket. Since he doesn't know what clothes are, he'll think I'm unarmed, which is as it should be, and if he shows fight, it won't take more than a week for me to get into action. All right, go on. Duquesne and I will come along." "Absolutely not. He's alone, so I've got to be. I notice that some of his men are covering us, though. You might do the same for them with a couple of the machine guns." Seaton stepped out of the car and went to meet the stranger. When they had approached to within a few feet of each other, the stranger stopped. He flexed his left arm smartly so that the fingertips touched his left ear and smiled broadly, exposing a row of splendid, shining green teeth. Then he spoke, a meaningless jumble of sounds. His voice, though light and thin, nevertheless seemed to be of powerful timbre. Seaton smiled in return and saluted. "Hello, Chief. I get your idea all right, and we're glad you're peaceable, but your language doesn't mean a thing in my young life." The chief tapped himself upon the chest, saying distinctly and impressively, "Nalboon." "Nalboon," repeated Seaton, and added, pointing to himself, "Seaton." "Seatin," answered the stranger, and again indicating himself, "Domak Gokmaranal." That must be his title, thought Seaton rapidly. Have to give myself one, I guess. "Shh! Boss of the road," he replied, drawing himself up with pride. The introduction made, Nalboon pointed to the wrecked plane, inclined his head in thanks, and turned to his people with one arm upraised, shouting an order in which Seaton could distinguish something that sounded like "Seatin! Base Uvi Rude!" Instantly every right arm in the assemblage was aloft, that of each man bearing a weapon, while the left arms snapped into the peculiar salute, and a mighty cry arose as all repeated the name and title of the distinguished visitor. Seaton turned to the Skylark, motioning to Crane to open the door. "Bring out one of those big four-color signal rockets, Mart," he called. "They're giving us a royal reception. Let's acknowledge it right." The party appeared, Crane carrying the huge rocket with an air of deference. As they approached, Seaton shrugged one shoulder and his cigarette case appeared in his hand. Nalboon started, and in spite of his utmost efforts at self-control, he glanced at it in surprise. The case flew open, and Seaton, taking a cigarette, extended the case. "Smoke?" he asked affably. The other took one, but showed plainly that he had no idea of the use to which it was to be put. This astonishment of the stranger at a simple sleight of hand feat and his apparent ignorance of tobacco emboldened Seaton. Reaching into his mouth, he pulled out a flaming match, at which Nalboon started violently. While all the natives watched in amazement, Seaton lighted the cigarette, and after half consuming it in 2 long inhalations, he apparently swallowed the remainder, only to bring it to light again. Having smoked it, he apparently swallowed the butt with evident relish. "They don't know anything about matches or smoking," he said, turning to Crane. "This rocket will tie them up in a knot. Step back, everybody." He bowed deeply to Nalboon, pulling a lighted match from his ear as he did so, and lighted the fuse. There was a roar, a shower of sparks, a blaze of colored fire as the great rocket flew upward. But to Seaton's surprise, Nalboon took it quite as a matter of course, saluting as an acknowledgment of the courtesy. Seaton motioned to his party to approach and turned to Crane. "Better not, Dick. Let him think that you are the king of everything in sight." "Not on your life. If he is one king, we are 2. And he introduced Crane with great ceremony to the Domak as the boss of the Skylark, at which the salute by his people was repeated. Nalboon then shouted an order, and a company of soldiers, led by an officer, came toward them, surrounding a small group of people, apparently prisoners. These captives, 7 men and 7 women, were much lighter in colour than the rest of the gathering, having skins of a ghastly pale shade, practically the same colour as the whites of their eyes. In other bodily aspects they were the same as their captors in appearance, save that they were entirely naked, except for the jewelled metal collars worn by all, and a massive metal belt worn by one man. They walked with a proud and lofty carriage, scorn for their captors in every step. Nalboon barked an order to the prisoners. They stared in defiance, motionless, until the man wearing the belt, who had studied Seaton closely, spoke a few words in a low tone, when they all prostrated themselves. Nalboon then waved his hand, giving the whole group to Seaton as slaves. Seaton, with no sign of his surprise, thanked the giver and motioned his slaves to rise. They obeyed and placed themselves behind the party, 2 men and 2 women behind Seaton, and the same number behind Crane, 1 man and 1 woman behind each of the others. Seaton then tried to make Nalboon understand that they wanted copper, pointing to his anklet, the only copper in sight. The chief instantly removed the trinket and handed it to Seaton, who, knowing by the gasp of surprise of the guard that it was some powerful symbol, returned it with profuse apologies. After trying in vain to make the other understand what he wanted, he led him into the Skylark and showed him the remnant of the power bar. He showed him its original size and indicated the desired number by counting to 16 upon his fingers. Nalboon nodded his comprehension and, going outside, pointed upward toward the largest of the 11 suns visible, motioning its rising and setting 4 times. He then invited the visitors in unmistakable sign language to accompany him as guests of honor, but Seaton refused. "Lead on, Macduff, we follow," he replied, explaining his meaning by signs as they turned to enter the vessel. The slaves followed closely until Crane remonstrated. "We don't want them aboard, do we? Dick, there are too many of them." "All right," Seaton replied and waved them away. As they stepped back, the guard seized the nearest, a woman, and forced her to her knees, while a man, adorned with a necklace of green human teeth and carrying a shining broadsword, prepared to decapitate her. "We must take them with us, I see," said Crane, as he brushed the guards aside. Followed by the slaves, the party entered the Skylark, and the dark green people embarked in their airplanes and helicopters. Nalboon rode in a large and gaily decorated plane, which led the fleet at its full speed of 600 miles an hour, the Skylark placing a few hundred yards above the flagship. "I don't get these folks at all, Mart," said Seaton after a moment's silence. "They have machines far ahead of anything we have on Earth, and big guns that shoot as fast as machine guns, and yet are scared to death at a little simple sleight of hand. They don't seem to understand matches at all, and yet treat fireworks as an everyday occurrence." "We will have to wait until we know them better," replied Crane, and Duquesne added, "From what I have seen, their power seems to be all electrical. Perhaps they aren't up with us in chemistry, even though they are ahead of us in mechanics." Flying above a broad but rapid and turbulent stream, the fleet soon neared a large city, and the visitors from Earth gazed with interest at this metropolis of the unknown world. The buildings were all the same height, flat-roofed, and arranged in squares very much as our cities are arranged. There were no streets, the spaces between the buildings being park-like areas, evidently laid out for recreation, amusement, and sport. There was no need for streets. All traffic was in the air. The air seemed full of flying vehicles, darting in all directions, but it was soon evident that there was exact order in the apparent confusion, each class of vessel and each direction of traffic having its own level. Eagerly, the 3 men studied the craft, which ranged in size from one-man helicopters, little more than single chairs flying about in the air, up to tremendous multiplane freighters capable of carrying thousands of tons. Flying high over the city to avoid its congested air lanes, the fleet descended toward an immense building just outside the city proper. and all landed upon its roof, save the flagship, which led the Skylark to a landing dock nearby, a massive pile of metal and stone, upon which Nalboon and his retinue stood to welcome the guests. After Seaton had anchored the vessel immovably by means of the attractor, the party disembarked, Seaton remarking with a grin, "Don't be surprised at anything I do, folks. I'm a walking storehouse of junk of all kinds, so that if occasion arises, I can put on a real exhibition." As they turned toward their host, a soldier, in his eagerness to see the strangers, jostled another. Without a word, 2 keen swords flew from their scabbards, and a duel to the death ensued. The visitors stared in amazement, but no one else paid any attention to the combat, which was soon over, the victor turning away from the body of his opponent and resuming his place without creating a ripple of interest. Nalboon led the way into an elevator, which dropped rapidly to the ground floor level. Massive gates were thrown open, and through ranks of people prostrate upon their faces, the party went out into the palace grounds of the Domak, or Emperor, of the great nation of Mardanael. Never before had earthly eyes rested upon such scenes of splendor. Every color and gradation of their peculiar spectrum was present, in solid, liquid, and gas. The carefully tended trees were all colors of the rainbow, as were the grasses and flowers along the walks. The fountains played streams of many and constantly changing hues, and even the air was tinted and perfumed, swirling through metal arches in billows of ever-varying colors and scents. Colors and combinations of colors impossible to describe were upon every hand, fantastically beautiful in that peculiar, livid light. Diamonds and rubies, their colors so distorted by the green radiance as to be almost unrecognizable, emeralds glowing with an intense green impossible in earthly light, together with strange gems peculiar to this strange world, sparkled and flashed from railings, statues and pedestals throughout the ground. "Isn't this gorgeous, Dick?" whispered Dorothy. "But what do I look like? I wish I had a mirror. You look simply awful. Do I look like you do?" "Not being able to see myself, I can't say, but I imagine you do. You look as you would under a county fair photographer's mercury vapor arc lamps, only worse. The colors can't be described. You might as well try to describe cerise to a man born blind as to try to express these colors in English. But as near as I can come to it, your eyes are a dark sort of purplish green, with the whites of your eyes and your teeth a kind of plush green. Your skin is a pale yellowish green, except for the pink of your cheeks, which is a kind of black, with orange and green mixed up in it. Your lips are black, and your hair is a funny kind of color, halfway between black and old rose with a little green and— "Heavens, Dick! Stop! That's enough!" choked Dorothy. "We all look like hobgoblins. We are even worse than the natives." "Sure we are. They were born here and are acclimated to it. We are strangers and aren't. I would like to see what one of these people would look like in Washington." Nalboon led them into the palace proper and into a great dining hall, where a table was already prepared for the entire party. This room was splendidly decorated with jewels, its many windows being simply masses of gems. The walls were hung with a cloth resembling silk, which fell to the floor in shimmering waves of color. Woodwork there was none. Doors, panels, tables, and chairs were cunningly wrought of various metals. Seaton and DeQueen could recognize a few of them, but for the most part they were unknown upon the earth, and were, like the jewels and vegetation of this strange world, of many and various peculiar colors. A closer inspection of one of the marvelous tapestries showed that it also was of metal, its threads numbering thousands to the inch. Woven of many different metals, of vivid but harmonious colors in a strange and intricate design, it seemed to writhe as its colors changed with every variation in the color of the light, which, pouring from concealed sources, was reflected by the highly polished metal and innumerable jewels of the lofty domed ceiling. "Oh, isn't this too perfectly gorgeous?" breathed Dot. "I'd give anything for a dress made out of that stuff, Dick. Cloth of gold is common by comparison." "Would you dare wear it, Dotty?" asked Margaret. "Would I? I'd wear it in a minute if I could only get it. It would take Washington by storm." "I'll try to get a piece of it then," smiled Seaton. "I'll see about it while we are getting the copper." "We'd better be careful in choosing what we eat here, Seaton," suggested Duquesne, as the Domac himself led them to the table. "We sure had. With a copper ocean and green teeth, I shouldn't be surprised if copper, arsenic, and other such trifles formed a regular part of their diet." "The girls and I will wait for you two chemists to approve every dish before we try it, then," said Crane. Nalboon placed his guests, the light-skinned slaves standing at attention behind them, and numerous servants, carrying great trays, appeared. The servants were intermediate in colour between the light and the dark races, with dull, unintelligent faces, but quick and deft in their movements. The first course, a thin, light wine, served in metal goblets, was approved by the chemists, and the dinner was brought on. There were mighty joints of various kinds of meat, birds and fish, both raw and cooked in many ways, green, pink, purple, and white vegetables and fruits. The major domo held each dish up to Seaton for inspection, the latter waving away the fish and the darkest green foods, but approving the others. Heaping plates, or rather metal trays, of food were placed before the diners, and the attendants behind their chairs handed them peculiar implements, knives with razor edges, needle-pointed stilettos instead of forks, and wide, flexible spatulas, which evidently were to serve the purposes of both forks and spoons. "I simply can't eat with these things," exclaimed Dorothy in dismay, "and I don't like to drink soup out of a can, so there!" "That's where my lumberjack training comes in handy," grinned Seaton. "With this spatula, I can eat faster than I could with 2 forks. What do you want, girls, forks or spoons or both?" "Both, please." Seaton reached out over the table, seizing forks and spoons from the air and passing them to the others, while the natives stared in surprise. The Domac took a bowl filled with brilliant blue crystals from the major domo, sprinkled his food liberally with the substance, and passed it to Seaton, who looked at the crystals attentively. "Copper sulfate," he said to Crane. "It's a good thing they add it at the table instead of cooking with it, or we'd be out of luck." Waving the copper sulfate away, he again reached out, this time producing a pair of small salt and pepper shakers, which he passed to the Domac after he had seasoned the dishes before him. Nalboon tasted the pepper cautiously and smiled in delight, half emptying the shaker upon his plate. He then sprinkled a few grains of salt into his palm, stared at them with an expression of doubting amazement, and after a few rapid sentences poured them into a dish held by an officer who had sprung to his side. The officer studied them closely, then carefully washed his chief's hand. Nalboon turned to Seaton, plainly asking for the salt cellar. "Sure, old tape 'em both, there's lots more where those came from," as he produced several more sets in the same mysterious way and handed them to Crane, who in turn passed them to the others. The meal progressed merrily, with much conversation in the sign language between the two parties. It was evident that Nalboon, usually stern and reticent, was in an unusually pleasant mood. The viands, though of peculiar flavour, were in the main pleasing to the palates of the earthly visitors. "This fruit salad, or whatever it is divine," remarked Dorothy after an experimental bite. "May we eat as much as we like, or had we better just eat a little?" "Go as far as you like," returned her lover. "I wouldn't recommend it as a steady diet, as I imagine everything contains copper and other heavy metals in noticeable amounts, and probably considerable arsenic. But for a few days it can't very well hurt us much." After the meal, Nalboon bade them a ceremonious farewell, and they were escorted to a series of 5 connecting rooms by the royal usher, escorted by an entire company of soldiers who mounted guard outside the doors. Gathered in one room, they discussed sleeping arrangements. The girls insisted that they would sleep together, and that the men should occupy the rooms at either side. As the girls turned away, the 4 slaves followed. "We don't want these people, and I can't make them go away." "I don't want them either," replied Seaton. "But if we chase them out, they'll get their heads chopped off. You girls take the women, and we'll take the men." Seaton waved all the women into the girls' room, but they paused irresolutely. One of them went up to the man wearing the metal belt, evidently their leader, and spoke to him rapidly as she threw her arms around his neck. He shook his head, motioning towards Seaton several times as he spoke to her reassuringly. With his arm about her tenderly, he led her to the door, the other women following. Crane and Duquesne having gone to their rooms with their attendants, the man wearing the belt drew the blinds and turned to assist Seton in taking off his clothes. "I never had a valet before, but go as far as you like if it pleases you," remarked Seaton as he began to throw off his clothes. A multitude of small articles fell from their hiding places in his garments as he removed them. Almost stripped, Seaton stretched vigorously, the muscles writhing and rippling in great ridges under the satin skin of his broad back and mighty arms and shoulders as he filled his capacious lungs and twisted about, working off the stiffness caused by the days of comparative confinement. The 4 slaves stared in open-mouthed astonishment at this display of muscular development and conversed among themselves as they gathered up Seaton's discarded clothing. Their leader picked up a salt shaker, a couple of silver knives and forks, and some other articles, and turned to Seaton, apparently asking permission to do something with them. Seaton nodded assent carelessly and turned to his bed. As he did so, he heard a slight clank of arms in the hall as the guard was changed, and lifting the blind a trifle, he saw that guards were stationed outside as well. As he went to bed, he wondered whether the guards were guards of honor or jailers, whether he and his party were honored guests or prisoners. 3 of the slaves, at a word from their chief, threw themselves upon the floor and slept, but he himself did not rest. Opening the apparently solid metal belt, he took out a great number of small tools, many tiny instruments, and several spools of insulated wire. He then took the articles Seaton had given him, taking great pains not to spill a single grain of salt, and set to work. Hour after hour he labored, a strange, exceedingly complex instrument taking form under his clever fingers. Chapter 14. Nalboon Unmasked. After a long, sound sleep, Seaton awoke and sprang out of bed. No sooner had he started to shave, however, than one of the slaves touched his arm, motioning him a reclining chair and showing him a keen blade, long and slightly curved. Seaton lay down, and the slave shaved him with a rapidity and smoothness he had never before experienced. So wonderfully sharp was the peculiar razor. After Seaton had dressed, the barber started to shave the chief slave, without any preliminary treatment save rubbing his face with a perfumed oil. "Hold on a minute," interjected Seaton, who was watching the process with interest. "Here's something that helps a lot." He lathered the face with his brush, and the man looked up in surprised pleasure as his stiff beard was swept away without a sound. Seaton called to the others, and soon the party was assembled in his room, all dressed very lightly because of the unrelieved and unvarying heat, which was constant at 100 degrees. A gong sounded, and one of the slaves opened the door, ushering in a party of servants bearing a table, ready set. During the meal, Seaton was greatly surprised at hearing Dorothy carrying on a halting conversation with one of the women standing behind her. "I knew that you were a language shark, Dotty, with 5 or 6 different ones to your credit, but I didn't suppose you could learn to talk this stuff in one day." "I can't," she replied, "but I've picked up a few words of it. I can understand very little of what they are trying to tell me." The woman spoke rapidly to the man standing behind Seaton, and as soon as the table had been carried away, he asked permission to speak to Dorothy. Fairly running across to her, he made a slight obeisance and in eager tones poured forth such a stream of language that she held up her hand to silence him. "Go slower, please," she said, and added a couple of words in his own tongue. There ensued a strange dialogue, with many repetitions and much use of signs. She turned to Seaton with a puzzled look. "I can't make out all he says, Dick, but he wants you to take him into another room of the palace here, to get back something or other that they took from him when they captured him. He can't go alone. I think he says he will be killed if he goes anywhere without you, and he says that when you get there, you must be sure not to let the guards come inside." "All right, let's go," and Seaton motioned the man to precede him. As Seaton started for the door, Dorothy fell into step beside him. "Better stay back, Dotty. I'll be back in a minute," he said at the door. "I will not stay back. Wherever you go, I go," she replied in a voice inaudible to the others. "I simply will not stay away from you a single minute that I don't have to." "All right, little girl," he replied in the same tone. "I don't want to be away from you either, and I don't think that we're in any danger here." Preceded by the chief slave and followed by half a dozen others, they went out into the hall. No opposition was made to their progress, but a full half company of armed guards fell in around them as an escort, regarding Seaton with looks composed of equal parts of reverence and fear. The slave led the way rapidly to a room in a distant wing of the palace and opened the door. As Seaton stepped in, he saw that it was evidently an audience chamber or courtroom, and that it was now entirely empty. As the guard approached the door, Seaton waved them back. All retreated across the hall except the officer in charge, who refused to move. Seaton, the personification of offended dignity, first stared at the offender, who returned the stare and stepped up to him insolently, then pushed him back roughly, forgetting that his strength, great upon earth, would be gigantic upon this smaller world. The officer spun across the corridor, knocking down 3 of his men in his flight. Picking himself up, he drew his sword and rushed, while his men fled in panic to the extreme end of the corridor. Seaton did not wait for him, but in one bound leaped halfway across the intervening space to meet him. With the vastly superior agility of his earthly muscles, he dodged the falling broadsword and drove his left fist full against the fellow's chin, with all the force of his mighty arm and all the momentum of his rapidly moving body behind the blow. The crack of breaking bones was distinctly audible as the officer's head snapped back. The force of the blow lifted him high into the air, and after turning a complete somersault, he brought up with a crash against the opposite wall, dropping to the floor stone dead. As several of his men, braver than the others, lifted their peculiar rifles, Seaton drew and fired in one incredibly swift motion, the explosive bullet obliterating the entire group of men and demolishing that end of the palace. In the meantime, the slave had taken several pieces of apparatus from a cabinet in the room and had placed them in his belt. Stopping only to observe for a few moments a small instrument which he clamped upon the head of the dead man, he rapidly led the way back to the room they had left and set to work upon the instrument he had constructed while the others had been asleep. He connected it, in an intricate system of wiring, with the pieces of apparatus he had just recovered. "That's a complex job of wiring," said Duquesne admiringly. "I've seen several intricate pieces of apparatus myself, but he has so many circuits there that I'm lost. It would take an hour to figure out the lines and connections alone." Straightening abruptly, the slave clamped several electrodes upon his temples and motioned to Seaton and the others, speaking to Dorothy as he did so. "He wants us to let him put those things on our heads," she translated. "Shall we let him, Dick?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I've got a real hunch that he's our friend, and I'm not sure of Nalboon. He doesn't act right." "I think so, too," agreed the girl, and Crane added, "I can't say that I relish the idea, but since I know that you are a good poker player, Dick, I am willing to follow your hunch. How about you, Duquesne?" "Not I," declared that worthy emphatically. "Nobody wires me up to anything I can't understand, and that machine is too deep for me." Margaret elected to follow Crane's example, and, impressed by the need for haste evident in the slave's bearing, the 4 walked up to the machine without further talk. The electrodes were clamped into quickly, and the slave pressed a lever. Instantly, the 4 visitors felt that they had a complete understanding of the languages and customs of both Mardonale, the nation in which they now were, and of Condal, to which nation the slaves belonged, the only 2 civilized nations upon Osnomi. While the look of amazement at this method of receiving instruction was still upon their faces, the slave, or rather, as they now knew him, Dunark, the Cofedix, or crown prince of the great nation of Condal, began to disconnect the wires. He cut out the wires leading to the 2 girls and to Crane, and was reaching for Seaton's when there was a blinding flash, a crackling sound, the heavy smoke of burning metal and insulation, and both Dunark and Seaton fell to the floor. Before Crane could reach them, however, they were upon their feet, and the stranger said in his own tongue, now understood by everyone but Duquesne, "This machine is a mechanical educator, a thing entirely new, in our world at least. Although I have been working on it for a long time, it is still in a very crude form. I did not like to use it in its present state of development, but it was necessary in order to warn you of what Nalboon is going to do to you, and to convince you that the best way of saving your lives would save our lives as well." The machine worked perfectly until something, I don't know what, went wrong. Instead of stopping, as it should have done, at teaching your party to speak our languages, it short-circuited us too completely, so that every convolution in each of our brains has been imprinted upon the brain of the other. It was the sudden formation of all the new convolutions that rendered us unconscious. I can only apologize for the breakdown and assure you that my intentions were of the best. "You needn't apologize," returned Seaton. "That was a wonderful performance, and we're both gainers anyway, aren't we? It has taken us all our lives to learn what little we know, and now we each have the benefit of 2 lifetimes, spent upon different worlds. I must admit, though, that I have a whole lot of knowledge that I don't know how to use." "I am glad you take it that way," returned the other warmly, "for I am infinitely the better off for the exchange. The knowledge I imparted was nothing compared to that which I received. But time presses. I must tell you our situation. I am, as you now know, the Kofdix of Kondal. The other 13 are Fedo and Fediro, or, as you would say, princes and princesses of the same nation. We were captured by one of Nalboon's raiding parties while upon a hunting trip, being overcome by some new stupefying gas, so that we could not kill ourselves. As you know, Kondal and Mardonal have been at war for over 10,000 Carcamo, something more than 6,000 years of your time. The war between us is one of utter extermination. Captives are never exchanged, and only once during an ordinary lifetime does one ever escape. Our attendants were killed immediately. We were being taken to furnish sport for Nalboon's party by being fed to one of his captive Colono, animals something like your earthly devilfish. When the escort of battleships was overcome by those 4 Carlono, the animals you saw, and one of them seized Nalboon's plane, in which we were prisoners. You killed the Carlon, saving our lives as well as those of Nalboon and his party. Having saved his life, you and your party should be honored guests of the most honored kind, and I venture to say that you would be so regarded in any other nation of the universe. But Nalboon, the Domak, a title equivalent to your word emperor and our word Carfidix, of Mardonal, is utterly without either honor or conscience, as are all Mardonalians. At first he was afraid of you, as were we all. We thought you visitors from a planet of our 15th sun, which is now at its nearest possible approach to us. After your display of superhuman power and ability, we expected instant annihilation. However, after seeing the Skylark as a machine, discovering that you are short of power, and finding that you are gentle instead of bloodthirsty by nature, Nalboon lost his fear of you and resolved to rob you of your vessel with its wonderful secrets of power. Though we are so ignorant of chemistry that I cannot understand the 1,000th part of what I just learned from you, we are a race of mechanics and have developed machines of many kinds to a high state of efficiency, including electrical machines of all kinds. In fact, electricity generated by our great waterfalls is our only power. No scientist upon Osnome has ever had an inkling that intra-atomic energy exists. Nalboon cannot understand the power, but he solved the means of liberating it at a glance, and that glance sealed your death warrants. With the Skylark, he could conquer Kondal, and to assure the downfall of my nation, he would do anything. Also, he or any other Osnomian scientist would go to any lengths whatever, would challenge the great First Cause itself to secure even one of those little bottles of the chemical you call salt. It is far and away the scarcest and most precious substance in the world. It is so rare that those bottles you produced at the table held more than the total amount previously known to exist upon Osnome. We have great abundance of all the heavy metals, but the lighter metals are rare. Sodium and chlorine are the rarest of all known elements. Its immense value is due, not to its rarity, but to the fact that it is an indispensable component of the controlling instruments of our wireless power stations, and that it is used as a catalyst in the manufacture of our hardest metals. For these reasons, you understand why Nalboon does not intend to let you escape, and why he intends that this kokum, our equivalent of a day, shall be your last. About the second or third hour of the sleeping period, he intends to break into the Skylark, learn its control, and secure the salt you undoubtedly have in the vessel. Then my party and myself will be thrown to the colon. You and your party will be killed, and your bodies smelted to recover the salt that is in them. This is the warning I had to give you. Its urgency explains the use of my untried mechanical educator. The hope that my party could escape with yours in your vessel explains why you saw me, the Kofedix of Kondal, prostrate myself before that archfiend Nalboon. How do you, a captive prince of another nation, know these things? Asked Crane, doubtfully. I read Nalboon's ideas from the brain of that officer whom the Karfidic Seton killed. He was a Ledex of the Guards, an officer of about the same rank as one of your colonels. He was high in Nalboon's favor, and he was to have been in charge of the work of breaking into the Skylark and killing us all. Let me caution you now, do not let any Mardonalian touch our hands with a wire, for if you do, your thoughts will be recorded, and the secrets of the Skylark and your many other mysterious things, such as smoking, matches, and magic feats, will be secrets no longer. Thanks for the information, responded Seton, but I want to correct your title for me. I'm no Karfidix, merely a plain citizen. In one way I see that is true, replied the Kofedix with a puzzled look. I cannot understand your government at all, but the inventor of the Skylark must certainly rank as a Karfidix. As he spoke, a smile of understanding passed over his face, and he continued, I see. Your title is Doctor of Philosophy, which must mean that you are the Karfidix of knowledge of the earth. No, you're way off. I'm... Certainly Seton is the Karfidix of knowledge, broke into Quen. Let it go at that, anyway, whatever it means. The thing to do now is to figure a way out of this. You chirped it then, Blackie. Dunark, you know this country better than we do. What do you suggest? I suggest that you take my party into the Skylark and escape from Mardonel as soon as possible. I can pilot you to Kondalek, the capital city of our nation. There, I can assure you, you will be welcomed as you deserve. My father, the Karfedix, will treat you as a Karfedix should be treated. As far as I am concerned, nothing I can ever do will lighten the burden of my indebtedness to you, but I promise you all the copper you want, and anything else you may desire that is within the power of man to give you. Seton thought deeply a moment, then shook Dunark's hand vigorously. That suits me, Kofedix, he said warmly. I thought from the first that you were our friend. Shall we make for the Skylark right now, or wait a while? We had better wait until after the second meal, the prince replied. We have no armor and no way of making any. We would be helpless against the bullets of any, except a group small enough so that you could kill them all before they could fire. The Kam, after the second meal, is devoted to strolling about the grounds, so that our visiting the Skylark would look perfectly natural. As the guard is very lax at that time, it is the best time for the attempt. But how about my killing his company of guards and blowing up one wing of his palace? Won't he have something to say about that? I don't know, replied the Kofedix doubtfully. It depends upon whether his fear of you or his anger is the greater. He should pay his call of state here in your apartment in a short time, as it is the inviolable rule of Osnom that any visitor shall receive a call of state from one of his own rank before leaving his apartment for the first time. His actions may give you some idea as to his feelings, though he is an accomplished diplomat and may conceal his real feelings entirely. But let me caution you not to be modest or soft-spoken. He will mistake softness for fear. All right, grinned Seton. In that case, I won't wait to try to find out what he thinks. If he shows any signs of hostility at all, I'll open up on him. Well, remarked Crane calmly, if we have some time to spare, we may as well wait comfortably instead of standing in the middle of the room. I, for one, have a lot of questions to ask about this new world. Acting upon this suggestion, the party seated themselves upon comfortable divans, and Dunark rapidly dismantled the machine he had constructed. The captives remained standing, always behind the visitors, until Seaton remonstrated. "Please sit down, everybody. There's no need of keeping up this farce of your being slaves as long as we're alone. Is there, Dunark?" "No, but at the first sound of the gong announcing a visitor, we must be in our places. Now that we are all comfortable and waiting, I will introduce my party to yours. Fellow Condalians, greet the Carfado, Seaton, and Crane," he began, his tongue fumbling over the strange names of a distant world, the Earth, and the two noble ladies, Miss Vanneman and Miss Spencer, soon to be their Carfadiro. "Guests from Earth, allow me to present to you the Cofadir Sitar, the only one of my wives who accompanied me upon our ill-fated hunting expedition." Then, still ignoring Duquesne as a captive, he introduced the other Condolians in turn as his brothers, sisters, cousins, nieces, and nephews, all members of the great ruling house of Condal. "Now," he concluded, "after I have a word with you in private, Dr. Seaton, I will be glad to give the others all the information in my power." He led Seaton out of earshot of the others and said in a low voice, "It is no part of Nalboon's plan to kill the two women. They are so beautiful, so different from our Osnomian women, that he intends to keep them alive. Understand?" "Yes," returned Seaton grimly, his eyes turning hard. "I get you all right. But what he'll do and what he thinks he'll do are two entirely different breeds of cats." Returning to the others, they found Dorothy and Sitar deep in conversation. "So a man has half a dozen or so wives?" Dorothy was asking in surprise. "How do you get along together? I'd fight like a wildcat if my husband tried to have other wives." "We get along splendidly, of course," returned the Osnomian princess in equal surprise. "I would not think of being a man's only wife. I wouldn't consider marrying a man who could win only one wife. Think what a disgrace it would be. And think how lonely one would be while her husband is away at war. We would go insane if we did not have the company of the other wives. There are 6 of us, and we could not get along at all without each other." "I've got a compliment for you and Peggy, Dotty," said Seaton. "Dunark here thinks that you two girls look good enough to eat, or words to that effect." Both girls flushed slightly, the purplish-black colour suffusing their faces. They glanced at each other, and Dorothy voiced the thought of both as she said, "How can you co-fedix, Dunark? In this horrible light we both look perfectly dreadful. These other girls would be beautiful if we were used to the colours, but we too look simply hideous." "Oh, no," interrupted Sitar. "You have a wonderfully rich colouring. It is a shame to hide so much of yourselves with robes." "Their eyes interpret colours differently than ours do," explained Seaton. "What to us are harsh and discordant colours are light and pleasing to their eyes. What looks like a kind of sloppy greenish-black to us may, in fact does, look a pale pink to them." "Are Condal and Mardonal the only 2 nations upon Osnome?" asked Crane. "The only civilized nations, yes. Osnome is divided into 2 great and almost equal continents, separated by a wide ocean which encircles the globe. One is Condal, the other Mardonal. Each nation has several nations or tribes of savages which inhabit various waste places. You are the light race, Mardonal the dark," continued Crane. "What are the servants, who seem halfway between?" "They are slaves." "Captured savages," interrupted Dorothy. "No, they are a separate race. They are a race so low in intelligence that they cannot exist except as slaves, but they can be trained to understand language and to do certain kinds of work. They are harmless and mild, making excellent servants. Otherwise they would have perished ages ago. All menial work and most of the manual labor is done by the slave race. Formerly criminals were sterilized and reduced to unwilling slavery, but there have been no unwilling slaves in Condal for hundreds of Carcamo. Why? Are there no criminals any more? No. With the invention of the thought recorder, an absolutely fair trial was assured, and the guilty were all convicted. They could not reproduce themselves, and as a natural result, crime died out. That is," he added hastily, "what we regard as crime. Dueling, for instance, is a crime upon Earth. Here it is a regular custom. In Kundal duels are rather rare and are held only when honor is involved, but here in Mardonal they are an everyday affair, as you saw when you landed." "What makes the difference?" asked Dorothy curiously. "With us, every man is a soldier. In Kondal, we train our youth in courage, valor, and high honor. In Mardonal, they train them in savage bloodthirstiness alone. Each nation fixed its policy in bygone ages to produce the type of soldier it thought most efficient." "I notice that everyone here wears those heavy collars," said Margaret. "What are they for?" "They are identification marks. When a child is nearly grown, a collar bearing his name and the device of his house is cast about his neck. This collar is made of arinak, a synthetic metal which, once formed, cannot be altered by any usual means. It cannot be scratched, cut, bent, broken, or worked in any way except at such a high temperature that death would result if such heat were applied to the collar. Once the arinak collar is cast about a person's neck, he is identified for life, and any adult Osnomian not wearing a collar is put to death." "That must be an interesting metal," remarked Crane. "Is your belt a similar mark?" "This belt is an idea of my own," and Dunark smiled broadly. "It looks like opaque arinak, but isn't. It is merely a pouch in which I carry anything I am particularly interested in. Even Nalboon thought it was arinak, so didn't trouble to try to open it. If he had opened it and taken my tools and instruments, I couldn't have built the educator. Is that transparent armor arinak?" "Yes, the only difference being that nothing is added to the matrix to color or make opaque the finished metal. It is in the preparation of this metal that salt is indispensable. It acts only as a catalyst, being recovered afterward, but neither nation has ever had enough salt to make all the armor they want." "Aren't those monsters, Carlono, I think you called them, covered by the same thing? And what are those animals, anyway?" Dorothy asked. "Yes, they are armored with arinak, and it is thought that the beasts grow it the same as fishes grow scales. The Carlono are the most frightful scourge of Osnom. Very little is known of them, though every scientist has theorized upon them since time immemorial. It is very seldom that one is ever killed, as they easily outfly our swiftest battleships and only fight when they can be victorious. To kill one requires a succession of the heaviest high-explosive shells in the same spot, a joint in the armor. And after the armor is once penetrated, the animal is blown into such small fragments that reconstruction is impossible. From such remains it has been variously described as a bird, a beast, a fish, and a vegetable, sexual, asexual, and hermaphroditic. Its habitat is unknown, it being variously supposed to live high in the air, deep in the ocean, and buried in the swamps. Another theory is that they live upon one of our satellites, which encounters our belt of atmosphere every Karkam. Nothing is certainly known about the monsters except their terrible destructiveness and their insatiable appetites. One of them will devour 5 or 6 airships at one time, absorbing the crews and devouring the cargo and all of the vessels except the very hardest of the metal parts." "Do they usually go in groups?" asked Crane. "If they do, I should think that a fleet of warships would be necessary for every party." "No, they are almost always found alone. Only very rarely are 2 found together. This is the first time in history that more than 2 have ever been seen together. 2 battleships can always defeat 1 Karlan, so they are never attacked. With 4 battleships, Nalboon considered his expedition perfectly safe, especially as they are now rare. The navies hunted down and killed what was supposed to be the last one upon Osno more than a Karkam ago, and none have been seen since, until we were attacked." The gong over the door sounded, and the Kondalians leaped to their positions back of the earthly visitors. The Koffidix went to the door. Nalboon brushed him aside and entered, escorted by a full company of heavily armed soldiery. A scowl of anger was upon his face, and he was plainly in an ugly mood. "Stop, Nalboon of Mardonale!" thundered Seaton in the Mardonalian tongue and with the full power of his mighty voice. "Dare you invade my privacy unannounced and without invitation?" The escort shrank back, but the Domak stood his ground, although he was plainly taken aback. With an apparent effort, he smoothed his face into lines of cordiality. "I merely came to inquire why my guards are slain and my palace destroyed by my honored guest. As for slaying your guards, they sought to invade my privacy. I warned them away, but one of them was foolish enough to try to kill me. Then the others attempted to raise their childish rifles against me, and I was obliged to destroy them. As for the wall, it happened to be in the way of the thought waves I hurled against your guards. Consequently, it was demolished. An honoured guest! Bah! Our honoured guests put to the indignity of being touched by the filthy hands of a mere ladex. You do not object to the touch of slaves," with a wave of his hand toward the Kondalians. "That is what slaves are for," coldly. "Is a Domak to wait upon himself in the court of Mardonal? But to return to the issue. Were I an honoured guest, this would never have happened. Know, Nalboon, that when you attempt to treat a visiting Domak of my race as a low-born captive, you must be prepared to suffer the consequences of your rashness. May I ask how you, so recently ignorant, know our language? You question me? That is bold. Know that I, the boss of the road, show ignorance or knowledge. When and where I please, you may go." Chapter 15. The Escape from Mardonal. "That was a wonderful bluff, Dick," exclaimed the Kofedix in English as soon as Nalboon and his guards had disappeared. "That was exactly the tone to take with him, too. You've sure got him guessing." "It seemed to get him all right, but I'm wondering how long it'll hold him. I think we'd better make a dash for the Skylark right now before he has time to think it over, don't you?" "That is undoubtedly the best way," Dunark replied, lapsing into his own tongue. "Nalboon is plainly in awe of you now, but if I understand him at all, he is more than ever determined to seize your vessel, and every Darkham's delay is dangerous." The Earth people quickly secured the few personal belongings they had brought with them. Stepping out into the hall and waving away the guards, Seaton motioned Dunark to lead the way. The other captives fell in behind, as they had done before, and the party walked boldly toward the door of the palace. The guards offered no opposition, but stood at attention and saluted as they passed. As they approached the entrance, however, Seaton saw the major domo hurrying away and surmised that he was carrying the news to Nalboon. Outside the door, walking directly toward the landing dock, Dunark spoke in a low voice to Seaton without turning. "Nalboon knows by this time that we are making our escape, and it will be war to the death from here to the Skylark. I do not think there will be any pursuit from the palace, but he has warned the officers in charge of the dock, and they will try to kill us as soon as we step out of the elevator, perhaps sooner. Nalboon intended to wait, but we have forced his hand, and the dock is undoubtedly swarming with soldiers now. Shoot first and oftenest. Shoot first and think afterward. Show no mercy, as you will receive none. Remember that the quality you call mercy does not exist upon Osnome." Rounding a great metal statue about 50 feet from the base of the towering dock, they saw that the door leading into one of the elevators was wide open, and that 2 guards stood just inside it. As they caught sight of the approaching party, the guards raised their rifles, but, quick as they were, Seaton was quicker. At the first sight of the open door, he had made 2 quick steps, and had hurled himself across the intervening 40 feet in a long football plunge. Before the 2 guards could straighten, he crashed into them, his great momentum hurling them across the elevator cage and crushing them into unconsciousness against its metal wall. "Good work," said Dunark, as he preceded the others into the elevator and, after receiving Seaton's permission, distributed the weapons of the 2 guards among the men of his party. "Now we can surprise those upon the roof. That was why you didn't shoot?" "Yes, I was afraid to risk a shot. It would give the whole thing away," Seaton replied, as he threw the unconscious guards out into the grounds and closed the massive door. "Aren't you going to kill them?" asked Sitar, amazement in every feature and a puzzled expression in her splendid eyes. A murmur arose from the other Kondalians, which was quickly silenced by the Kofedix. "It is dishonorable for a soldier of Earth to kill a helpless prisoner," he said briefly. "We cannot understand it, but we must not attempt to sway him in any point of honor." Dunark stepped to the controls, and the elevator shot upward, stopping at a landing several stories below the top of the dock. He took a peculiar device from his belt and fitted it over the muzzle of his strange pistol. "We will get out here," he instructed the others, "and go up the rest of the way by a little-used flight of stairs. We will probably encounter some few guards, but I can dispose of them without raising an alarm. You will all stay behind me, please." Seaton remonstrated, and Dunark went on, "No, Seaton, you have done your share and more. I am upon familiar ground now and can do the work alone better than if you were to help me. I will call upon you, however, before we reach the dock." The Corphidix led the way, his pistol resting lightly against his hip, and at the first turn of the corridor they came full upon 4 guards. The pistol did not move from its place at the side of the leader, but there were 4 subdued clicks, and the 4 guards dropped dead with bullets through their brains. "Seaton, that is some silencer," whispered the Queen. "I didn't suppose a silencer could work that fast." "They don't use powder," Seaton replied absently, all his faculties directed toward the next corner. "The bullets are propelled by an electrical charge." In the same manner, Dunark disposed of several more guards before the last stairway was reached. "Seaton," he whispered in English, "now is the time we need your rapid pistol work and your high-explosive shells. There must be hundreds of soldiers on the other side of that door, armed with machine cannons shooting high-explosive shells at the rate of 1,000 per minute. Our chance is this. Their guns are probably trained upon the elevators and main stairways, since this passage is unused, and none of us would be expected to know of it. Most of them don't know of it themselves. It will take them a second or two to bring their guns to bear upon us. We must do all the damage we can, kill them all, if possible, in that second or two. If Crane will lend me a pistol, we'll make the rush together." "I've a better scheme than that," interrupted Duquesne. "Next to you, Seaton, I'm the fastest man with a gun here. Also, like you, I can use both hands at once. Give me a couple of clips of those special cartridges, and you and I will blow that bunch into the air before they know we're here." It was decided that the 2 pistol experts should take the lead, closely followed by Crane and Dunark. The weapons were loaded to capacity and put in readiness for instant use. "Let's go, Bunch," said Seaton. "The quicker we start, the quicker we'll get back. Get ready to run out there, all the rest of you, as soon as the battle's over. Ready? On your marks, get set, go!" He kicked the door open, and there was a stuttering crash as the 4 automatic pistols simultaneously burst into practically continuous flame, a crash obliterated by an overwhelming concussion of sound as the explosive shells, sweeping the entire roof with a rapidly opening fan of death, struck their marks and exploded. Well, it was for the little group of wanderers that the 2 men in the door were past masters in the art of handling their weapons. Well, it was that they had in their tiny pistol bullets the explosive force of hundreds of giant shells. For rank upon rank of soldiery were massed upon the roof. Rapid-fire cannon, terrible engines of destruction, were pointing toward the elevators and toward the main stairways and approaches. But so rapid and fierce was the attack that even those trained gunners had no time to point their guns. The battle lasted little more than a second, being over before either Crane or Dunark could fire a shot, and silence again reigned, even while broken and shattered remnants of the guns and fragments of the metal and stone of the dock were still falling to the ground through a fine mist of what had once been men. Assured by a rapid glance that not a single Mardonalian remained upon the dock, Seaton turned back to the others. "Make it snappy, Bunch. This is going to be a mighty unhealthy spot for us in a few minutes." Dorothy threw her arms around his neck in relief. With one arm about her, he hastily led the way across the dock toward the Skylark, choosing the path with care because of the yawning holes blown into the structure by the terrific force of the explosions. The Skylark was still in place, held immovable by the attractor, but what a sight she was! Her crystal windows were shattered. Her mighty plates of 4-foot Norwegian armor were bent and cracked and twisted. 2 of her doors, warped and battered, hung awry from their broken hinges. Not a shell had struck her. All this damage had been done by flying fragments of the guns and of the dock itself, and Seaton and Crane, who had developed the new explosive, stood aghast at its awful power. They hastily climbed into the vessel, and Seaton assured himself that the controls were uninjured. "I hear battleships," Dunark said. "Is it permitted that I operate one of your machine guns?" "Go as far as you like," responded Seaton, as he placed the women beneath the copper bar, the safest place in the vessel, and leaped to the instrument board. Before he reached it, and while De Queen, Crane, and Dunark were hastening to the guns, the whine of giant helicopter screws was plainly heard. A ranging shell from the first warship, sighted a little low, exploded against the side of the dock beneath them. He reached the levers just as the second shell screamed through the air a bare 4 feet above them. As he shot the Skylark into the air under 5 notches of power, a steady stream of the huge bombs poured through the spot where, an instant before, the vessel had been. Crane and Duquesne aimed several shots at the battleships, which were approaching from all sides, but the range was so extreme that no damage was done. They heard the continuous chattering of the machine gun operated by the Cofedix, however, and turned toward him. He was shooting, not at the warships, but at the city rapidly growing smaller beneath them, moving the barrel of the rifle in a tiny spiral, spraying the entire city with death and destruction. As they looked, the first of the shells reached the ground, just as Dunark ceased firing for lack of ammunition. They saw the palace disappear as if by magic, being instantly blotted out in a cloud of dust. A cloud which, with a spiral motion of dizzying rapidity, increased in size until it obscured the entire city. Having attained sufficient altitude to be safe from any possible pursuit and out of range of even the heaviest guns, Seaton stopped the vessel and went out into the main compartment to consult with the other members of the group about their next move. "It sure does feel good to get a breath of cool air, folks," he said, as he drew with relief a deep breath of the air which, at that great elevation, was of an icy temperature and very thin. He glanced at the little group of Kandalians as he spoke, then leaped back to the instrument board with an apology on his lips. They were gasping for breath and shivering with the cold. He switched on the heating coils and dropped the Skylark rapidly in a long descent toward the ocean. "If that is the temperature you enjoy, I understand at last why you wear clothes," said the Cofedix, as soon as he could talk. "Do not your planes fly up into the regions of low temperature?" asked Crane. "Only occasionally, and all high-flying vessels are enclosed and heated to our normal temperature. We have heavy wraps, but we dislike to wear them so intensely that we never subject ourselves to any cold." "Well, there's no accounting for tastes," returned Seaton, "but I can't hand your climate a thing. It's hotter even than Washington in August. And that, as the poet feelingly remarked, is going some. But there's no reason for sitting here in the dark," he continued, as he switched on the powerful daylight lamps which lighted the vessel with the nearest approach to sunlight possible to produce. As soon as the lights were on, Dorothy looked intently at the strange women. "Now we can see what color they really are," she explained to her lover in a low voice. "Why, they aren't so very different from what they were before, except that the colors are much softer and more pleasing. They really are beautiful in spite of being green. Don't you think so, Dick?" "They're a handsome bunch, all right," he agreed. And they were. Their skins were a light, soft green, tanned to an olive shade by their many fervent suns. Their teeth were a brilliant and shining grass green. Their eyes and their long, thick hair were a glossy black. The Kandalians looked at the earthly visitors and at each other, and the women uttered exclamations of horror. "What a frightful light!" exclaimed Sitar. "Please shut it off. I would rather be in total darkness than look like this." "What's the matter, Sitar?" asked the puzzled Dorothy as Seaton turned off the lights. "You look perfectly stunning in this light." "They see things differently than we do," explained Seaton. "Their optic nerves react differently than ours do. While we look all right to them and they look all right to us, in both kinds of light, they look just as different to themselves under our daylight lamps as we do to ourselves in their green light. Is that explanation clear?" "It's clear enough as far as it goes, but what do they look like to themselves?" "That's too deep for me. I can't explain it any better than you can. Take the Osnomian color M-Lap, for instance. Can you describe it?" "It's a kind of greenish-orange, but it seems as though it ought not to look like that color either." That's it, exactly. From the knowledge you received from the educator, it should be a brilliant purple. That is due to the difference in the optic nerves, which explains why we see things so differently from the way the Osnomians do. Perhaps they can describe the way they look to each other in our white light. Can you, Sitar? Asked Dorothy. One word describes it. Horrible, replied the Kandalian princess, and her husband added, The colors are distorted and unrecognizable, just as your colors are to your eyes in our light. Well, now that the color question is answered, let's get going. I pretty nearly asked you the way. Dunark forgot that I know it as well as you do. The Skylark set off at as high an altitude as the Osnomians could stand. As they neared the ocean, several great Mardonalian battleships, warned of the escape, sought to intercept them. But the Skylark hopped over them easily, out of range of their heaviest guns, and flew onward at such speed that pursuit was not even attempted. The ocean was quickly crossed. Soon the space car came to rest over a great city, and Seaton pointed out the palace, which, with its landing dock nearby, was very similar to that of Nalboon in the capital city of Mardonal. Crane drew Seaton to one side. Do you think it is safe to trust these Kandalians any more than it was the others? How would it be to stay in the Lark instead of going into the palace? Yes, Smart, this bunch can be trusted. Dunark has a lot of darn queer ideas, but he's square as a die. He's our friend and will get us the copper. We have no choice now anyway. Look at the bar. We haven't an ounce of copper left. We're down to the plating in spots. Besides, we couldn't go anywhere if we had a ton of copper because the old bus is a wreck. She won't hold air. You could throw a cat out through the shell in any direction. She'll have to have a lot of work done on her before we can think of leaving. As to staying in her, that wouldn't help us a bit. Steel is as soft as wood to these folks. Their shells would go through her as though she were made of mush. They are made of metal that is harder than diamond and tougher than rubber, and when they strike, they bore in like drill bits. If they are out to get us, they'll do it anyway, whether we're here or there, so we may as well be guests. But there's no danger, Mart. You know I swapped brains with him, and I know him as well as I know myself. He's a good, square man, one of our kind of folks. Convinced, Crane nodded his head, and the Skylark dropped toward the dock. While they were still high in air, Dunark took an instrument from his belt and rapidly manipulated a small lever. The others felt the air vibrate, a peculiar, pulsating wave, which, to the surprise of the earthly visitors, they could read without difficulty. It was a message from the Kofedix to the entire city, telling of the escape of his party and giving the news that he was accompanied by 2 great Karfido from another world. Then the pulsations became unintelligible, and all knew that he had tuned his instrument away from the general key into the individual key of some one person. I just let my father, the Karfedix, know that we are coming, he explained as the vibrations ceased. From the city beneath them, hundreds of great guns roared forth a welcome. Banners and streamers hung from every possible point, and the air became tinted and perfumed with a bewildering variety of colors and scents, and quivered with the rush of messages of welcome. The Skylark was soon surrounded by a majestic fleet of giant warships, who escorted her with impressive ceremony to the landing dock, while around them flitted great numbers of other aircraft. The tiny one-man helicopters darted hither and thither, apparently always in imminent danger of colliding with some of their larger neighbors, but always escaping as though by a miracle. Beautiful pleasure planes soared and dipped and wheeled like giant gulls, and cleaving their stately way through the numberless lesser craft. Immense multiplane passenger liners, partially supported by helicopter screws, turned aside from their scheduled courses to pay homage to the Kofidix of Kondal. As the Skylark approached the top of the dock, all the escorting vessels dropped away, and Crane saw that instead of the brilliant assemblage he had expected to see upon the landing place, there was only a small group of persons, as completely unadorned as were those in the car. In answer to his look of surprise, the Kofidix said with deep feeling, "My father, mother, and the rest of the family. They know that we, as escaped captives, would be without harness or trappings, and are meeting us in the same state." Seaton brought the vessel to the dock near the little group, and the earthly visitors remained inside their vessel while the rulers of Condal welcomed the sons and daughters they had given up for dead. After the affecting reunion, which was very similar to an earthly one under similar circumstances, the Cofidix led his father up to the Skylark, and his guests stepped down upon the dock. "Friends," Dunark began, "I have told you of my father, Roban, the Carfedix of Condal. Father, it is a great honor to present to you those who rescued us from Mardonal: Seaton, Carfedix of Knowledge; Crane, Carfedix of Wealth; Miss Vanneman, and Miss Spencer. Carfedix du Queen," waving his hand toward him, "is a lesser Carfedix of Knowledge, captive to the others." "The Cofedix Dunark exaggerates our services," deprecated Seaton, "and doesn't mention the fact that he saved all our lives. But for him, we all should have been killed." The Carfedix, disregarding Seaton's remark, acknowledged the indebtedness of Condal in heartfelt accents before he led them back to the other party and made the introductions. As all walked toward the elevators, the Emperor turned to his son with a puzzled expression. "I know from your message, Dunark, that our guests are from a distant solar system, and I can understand your accident with the educator, but I cannot understand the titles of these men. Knowledge and wealth are not ruled over. Are you sure that you have translated their titles correctly?" "As correctly as I can. We have no words in our language to express the meaning. Their government is a most peculiar one, the rulers all being chosen by the people of the whole nation." "Extraordinary," interjected the older man. "How then can anything be accomplished?" "I do not understand the thing myself. It is so utterly unheard of. But they have no royalty, as we understand the term. In America, their country, every man is equal. That is," he hastened to correct himself, "they are not all equal either, as they have two classes which would rank with royalty: those who have attained to great heights of knowledge, and those who have amassed great wealth. This explanation is entirely inadequate, and does not give the right idea of their positions, but it is as close as I can come to the truth in our language." "I am surprised that you should be carrying a prisoner with you, Carfido," said Roban, addressing Seaton and Crane. "You will, of course, be at perfect liberty to put him to death in any way that pleases you, just as though you were in your own kingdoms. But perchance you are saving him so that his death will crown your homecoming." The Cofidix spoke in answer while Seaton, usually so quick to speak, was groping for words. "No, father, he is not to be put to death. That is another peculiar custom of the Earthmen. They consider it dishonorable to harm a captive or even an unarmed enemy. For that reason we must treat the Carfedix du Queen with every courtesy due his rank, but at the same time he is to be allowed to do only such things as may be permitted by Seaton and Crane." "Yet they do not seem to be a weak race," mused the older man. "They are a mighty race, far advanced in evolution," replied his son. "It is not weakness, but a peculiar moral code. We have many things to learn from them, and but few to give them in return. Their visit will mean much to Condal." During this conversation they had descended to the ground and had reached the palace, after traversing grounds even more sumptuous and splendid than those surrounding the palace of Nalboon. Inside the palace walls, the Cofidix himself led the guests to their rooms, accompanied by the major domo and an escort of guards. He explained to them that the rooms were all intercommunicating, each having a completely equipped bathroom. "Complete except for cold water, you mean?" said Seaton with a smile. "There is cold water," rejoined the other, leading him into the bathroom and bringing a 10-inch stream of lukewarm water into the small swimming pool built of polished metal, which forms part of every Condalian bathroom. "But I am forgetting that you like extreme cold. We will install refrigerating machines at once." "Don't do it! Thanks just the same. We won't be here long enough to make it worthwhile." Dunark smilingly replied that he would make his guests as comfortable as he could, and after informing them that in one kam he would return and escort them into Koprat, took his leave. Scarcely had the guests freshened themselves when he was back, but he was no longer the Dunark they had known. He now wore a metal and leather harness, which was one blaze of precious gems, and a leather belt hung with jeweled weapons replaced the familiar hollow girdle of metal. His right arm, between the wrist and the elbow, was almost covered by 6 bracelets of a transparent metal, deep cobalt blue in colour, each set with an incredibly brilliant stone of the same shade. On his left wrist he wore an osnomian chronometer. This was an instrument resembling the odometer of an automobile, whose numerous revolving segments revealed a large and constantly increasing number, the date and time of the osnomian day, expressed in a decimal number of the Kakamo of Kandalian history. "Greetings, O guests from Earth! I feel more like myself now that I am again in my trappings and have my weapons at my side. Will you accompany me to Koprat, or are you not hungry?" As he attached the peculiar timepieces to the wrists of the guests, with bracelets of the deep blue metal. "We accept with thanks," replied Dorothy promptly. "We're starving to death, as usual." As they walked toward the dining hall, Dunark noticed that Dorothy's eyes strayed toward his bracelets, and he answered her unasked question. "These are our wedding rings. Man and wife exchange bracelets as part of the ceremony. Then you can tell whether a man is married or not, and how many wives he has, simply by looking at his arm." "We should have something like that on Earth, Dick. Then married men wouldn't find it so easy to pose as bachelors." Roban met them at the door of the great dining hall. He also was in full panoply, and Dorothy counted 10 of the heavy bracelets upon his right arm as he led them to places near his own. The room was a replica of the other osnomian dining hall they had seen, and the women were decorated with the same barbaric splendor of scintillating gems. After the meal, which was a happy one, taking the nature of a celebration in honor of the return of the captives, Duquesne went directly to his room, while the others spent the time until the 0 hour in strolling about the splendid grounds, always escorted by many guards. Returning to the room occupied by the 2 girls, the couple separated, each girl accompanying her lover to the door of his room. Margaret was ill at ease, though trying hard to appear completely self-possessed. "What is the matter, sweetheart Peggy?" asked Crane, solicitously. "I didn't know that you—" She broke off and continued with a rush. "What did the Kofedix mean just now, when he called you the Carfedix of wealth?" "Well, you see, I happen to have some money," he began. "Then you are the great M. Reynolds Crane?" She interrupted in consternation. "Leave off the great," he said then, noting her expression, he took her in his arms and laughed slightly. "Is that all that was bothering you? What does a little money amount to between you and me?" "Nothing, but I'm awfully glad that I didn't know it before," she replied, as she returned his caress with fervor. "That is, it means nothing if you are perfectly sure I'm not." Crane, the imperturbable, broke a lifelong rule and interrupted her. "Do not say that, dear. You know as well as I do that between you and me there never have been, are not now, and never shall be, any doubts or any questions. If I could have a real cold bath now, I'd feel fine," remarked Seaton, standing in his own door, or with Dorothy by his side. "I'm no blooming Englishman, but in weather as hot as this I sure would like to dive into a good cold tank. How do you feel after all this excitement, Dotty? Up to standard?" "I'm scared, Purple," she replied, nestling against him, "or, at least, if not exactly scared, I'm apprehensive and nervous. I always thought I had good nerves, but everything here is so horrible and unreal that I can't help but feel it. When I'm with you, I really enjoy the experience, but when I'm alone or with Peggy, especially in the sleeping period, which is so awfully long, and when it seems that something terrible is going to happen every minute, my mind goes off in spite of me into thoughts of what may happen. Why, last night Peggy and I just huddled up to each other in a ghastly yellow funk, dreading we knew not what. The 2 of us slept hardly at all." "I'm sorry, little girl," replied Seaton, embracing her tenderly, "sorrier than I can say. I know that your nerves are all right, but you haven't roughed it enough, or lived in strange environments enough to be able to feel at home. The reason you feel safer with me is that I feel perfectly at home here myself, not that your nerves are going to pieces or anything like that. It won't be for long, though, sweetheart. As soon as we get the chariot fixed up, we'll beat it back to the earth so fast it'll make your head spin." "Yes, I think that's the reason, lover. I hope you won't think I'm a clinging vine, but I can't help being afraid of something here every time I'm away from you. You're so self-reliant, so perfectly at ease here, that it makes me feel the same way. I am perfectly at ease. There's nothing to be afraid of. I've been in hundreds of worse places, right on Earth. I sure wish I could be with you all the time, sweetheart girl. Only you can understand just how much I wish it. But, as I said before, it won't be long until we can be together all the time. Dorothy pushed him into his room, followed him within it, closed the door, and put both hands on his arm. "Dick, sweetheart," she whispered, while a hot blush suffused her face, "you're not as dumb as I thought you were. You're dumber. But if you simply won't say it, I will. Don't you know that a marriage that is legal where it is performed is legal anywhere, and that no law says that the marriage must be performed upon the earth?" He pressed her to his heart in a mighty embrace, and his low voice showed in every vibration the depth of the feeling he held for the beautiful woman in his arms as he replied, "I never thought of that, sweetheart, and I wouldn't have dared mention it if I had. You're so far away from your family and your friends that it would seem—" "It wouldn't seem anything of the kind," she broke in earnestly. "Don't you see, you big, dense, wonderful man, that it is the only thing to do? We need each other, or at least I need you. So much now." "Say each other, it's right," declared her lover with fervor. "It's foolish to wait. Mother would like to have seen me married, of course, but there will be great advantages, even on that side. A grand wedding, of the kind we would simply have to have in Washington, doesn't appeal to me any more than it does to you, and it would bore you to extinction. Dad would hate it too. It's better all around to be married here." Seaton, who had been trying to speak, silenced her. "I'm convinced, Dottie, have been ever since the first word. If you can see it that way, I'm so glad that I can't express it. I've been scared stiff every time I thought of our wedding. I'll speak to the Carfedics the first thing in the morning, and we'll be married tomorrow, or rather today, since it is past the zero calm." As he glanced at the chronometer upon his wrist, which, driven by wireless impulses from the master clock in the National Observatory, was clicking off the Darkamo with an almost inaudible purr of its smoothly revolving segments. How would it be to wake him up and have it done now? "Oh, Dick, be reasonable. That would never do. Tomorrow will be most awfully sudden, as it is. And Dick, please speak to Martin, will you? Peggy's even more scared than I am, and Martin, the dear old stupid, is even less likely to suggest such a thing as this kind of a wedding than you are. Peggy's afraid to suggest it to him." "Woman," he said in mock sternness, "is this a put-up job?" "It certainly is. Did you think I had nerve enough to do it without help?" Seaton turned and opened the door. "Mart, bring Peggy over here," he called, as he led Dorothy back into the girl's room. "Heavens, Dick, be careful. You'll spoil the whole thing." "No, I won't. Leave it to me. I bashfully admit that I'm a regular bearcat at this diplomatic stuff. Watch my smoke." "Folks," he said, when the four were together, "Dottie and I have been talking things over, and we've decided that today's the best possible date for a wedding. Dottie's afraid of these long daylight nights, and I admit that I'd sleep a lot sounder if I knew where she was all the time instead of only part of it. She says she's willing, provided you folks see it the same way and make it double. How about it?" Margaret blushed furiously, and Crane's lean, handsome face assumed a darker color as he replied, "A marriage here would of course be legal anywhere, provided we have a certificate, and we could be married again upon our return if we think it desirable. It might look as though we were taking an unfair advantage of the girls, Dick, but considering all the circumstances, I think it would be the best thing for everyone concerned." He saw the supreme joy in Margaret's eyes, and his own assumed a new light as he drew her into the hollow of his arm. "Peggy has known me only a short time, but nothing else in the world is as certain as our love. It is the bride's privilege to set the date, so I will only say that it cannot be too soon for me." "The sooner the better," said Margaret, with a blush that would have been divine in any earthly light. "Did you say today, Dick?" "I'll see the Carfedics as soon as he gets up," he answered, and walked with Dorothy to his door. "I'm just too supremely happy for words." Dorothy whispered in Seaton's ear as he bade her good night. "I won't be able to sleep or anything."